started. Make sure it starts up. Which looks to be going well. Get our chat. Find and activate. Check. YouTube. Pick Twitch. Doing well. Twitch is staying unstable for some reason. Refresh it. Freeze itself out. Looks like it. Alright. There's something else I had to check. Okay, so I have to update stream info. More on top of that. I gotta do it. YouTube is awkward. Okay, that should do it. Alright, I'm also gonna check the sound. We got desktop sound. We also have mic sound. Make sure it's in the spot. Alright, everything's set up. So the first thing I wanted to look into today is I think there's been new news about the Alberta separatist stuff. I think it got shut down in a lawsuit. And so I'm actually going to look into that first. I hear that the Alberta separatist petition got shut down in a lawsuit. Can you go into more detail? Will there be a referendum on separatism in the future? Hey, it even got the punctuation right this time. Perfect. I didn't have to update it at all. Okay, so I've covered the Alberta separatism stuff a couple times now. I'm trying to keep up to date on it. Here's a detailed breakdown of what's happened and where things stand. The ruling on May 13th, 2026. Oh, like 5 days ago. Court of King's Bench Justice Shiana Leonard struck down the citizen-led petition by the group Stay Free Alberta, which has been seeking a referendum on Alberta independence. The judge ruled that Alberta's chief electoral officer should never have approved the petition in the first place. The decision rests on two main legal grounds. Duty to consult First Nations. Justice Leonard found that the government, as representative of the Crown, failed in its duty to consult with the... Okay. We're going to try and get these right.
Athabasca Chippewayan First Nation.
Athabasca Chippewayan First Nation. Blood Tribe. Okay, we'll get to read those.
Biik Nation, and Siksika Nation.
I'm not going to try and copy that, but there they are. Before the petition process moved forward, ignoring a prior court ruling, the ruling also found that the Chief Electoral Office failed to properly consider an earlier decision by Justice Kent Easby, who had previously determined that an Alberta independence question would violate treaty rights and be unconstitutional. Justice Leonard ruled the petition should not have been reissued after legislative amendment removed constitutional screening requirements for referendum questions. So it looks like it's been shut down in the court system. There is, like, from my understanding, the Premier of Alberta can just put a question to a referendum without going through all of this. So it's not like it's impossible to still see a referendum. And there was another petition called Forever Canada, which is actually the opposite. A petition, essentially because there was the separatist movement, the petition went through, and it went through a harder petition requirement to get through. But if you put something like that to the test, what was it called again? The Forever Canada petition. If you put that in a referendum, you could essentially, through the yes no vote, because that was a referendum to stay a part of Canada rather than to leave. Thank you. So rather than putting the question of do you want to leave, you can put the question of do you want to stay, and through a no vote, you can still get how many people want to leave, right? So, like, there's still, I don't know why they did it this way, because they legally shut down the separatist referendum question, right? But it doesn't have a lot of support. From what I was reading, like, when people understand and take into account consequences, it had like a 15% support. Like, if you put a referendum, the best way to shut down the Alberta separatist movement is to show them how unpopular the movement is. And a referendum would do that. But as soon as you like, oh no, you're not allowed a referendum, shut you down with the law, you're feeding the fire. Like, now the Alberta separatists are going to think, oh, you're not allowing a referendum because you're shutting down our rights, and you know that we'll win. So you're shutting us down legally. And that doesn't seem like the way to go about it. Allowing a referendum question, I don't think is bad. If anything, I'd say we allow the referendum, show them how unpopular it is, and that solves the problem. Okay, let's continue. What happened to the signatures? The court ruled that the signatures collected, which Stay Free Alberta claimed exceeded 300,000, well above the roughly 178,000 required, will not be counted, and the results cannot be certified under the current process. Oh. The more you try and use this like legal talk, push back against them, the more you'll fuel the movement. Reactions. Okay. First Nations welcome the ruling, calling it a major affirmation of treaty rights and Indigenous consultation obligations, and noting it was the second time Alberta courts had identified significant legal problems with the separatist initiative. Premier Danielle Smith called the decision incorrect in law and anti-democratic. Oh. And announced the government would appeal. Smith has repeatedly said she does not personally support Alberta separating from Canada, but believes Albertans should be allowed to pursue citizen-led referendum questions. Like, I completely agree with her here. Like, I agree. I do not support Alberta separating from Canada, but believe that if you get enough votes, you should be allowed a referendum question. And they did get the votes. So, Stay Free Alberta lawyer Jeff Rath called the ruling completely incomprehensible and also announced plans to appeal. He suggested support would buy UCP membership to pressure Smith into calling a referendum directly under Section 1. Yeah, like what I said, Danielle Smith, as the premier, can pretty much just put whatever she wants on a referendum. They're already doing 9 questions. Adding another 10th question, you can kind of put whatever she wants on there. It's basically just polling Albertans' official referendum of the Referendum Act. Will there be a referendum? It's now quite uncertain. There are 2 main paths forward being discussed: appeal. Both the provincial government and Stay Free Alberta have signaled they will appeal the ruling, so the courts aren't done with this yet. Government called referendum. Stay Free Alberta lawyers argued that Premier Smith could still directly call a referendum on separation through government action rather than the citizen initiative process. Stay Free Alberta leader Mitch said he still expects Smith to allow a vote to happen this fall. For broader context, a separate pro-Canada petition known as Forever Canada, organized by former Deputy Premier Thomas Lunk, has previously surpassed 400,000 verified signatures, suggesting significant public opinion on both sides of the debate. The legal and political battle over the potential referendum is very much ongoing. Okay, although it's been shut down due to duty to consult First Nations, ignoring a prior court ruling. It looks like there is an appeal process from the provincial government and the Stay Free Alberta. It's always possible that the Premier of Alberta puts it on the question anyway. And that looks like where we're currently at. What's the current support for Alberta separation among Albertans? Oh. Close enough. It'll get it. Here's a thorough picture of where public opinion stands based on multiple polls conducted throughout early 2026. The overall picture of vocal minority. Across all major polls, separation support sits firmly in the minority, though numbers vary by pollster and methodology. Okay, 15% would vote for separation. Found 75 would vote to stay. It's found 65 would vote to stay in Canada, while 29 would vote or lean towards leaving. Of those wanting to leave, fewer than 10% said they definitely vote to separate. Okay, so 19, 10. 31 support independence, up 9 points. I mean that's quite a bit. I guess that's very similar to this. People who would vote or lean towards leaving would support independence, 27%, or 26%. So you're ranging from like 20 20 to 30%, actually. But I mean, when you ask, will you definitely vote to leave? The number drops. When you ask, do you lean towards leaving or staying? The number goes up to between 20 and 30. Okay, let's see. Is there a bottom line? Pollsters note that support has been remarkably stable over years of tracking. As one pollster put it, we've been tracing that for 8 years. In 8 years, we haven't seen much movement. It's gotten noisier in recent months, but they don't seem to be growing their support. The separatist movement has been described as a very vocal minority and a very quiet super majority. So while the movement is loud and energized, it hasn't yet broken through to majority support. And the recent court ruling strikes down the petition adds another significant obstacle to any near-term referendum. Like I think if a citizen-led petition should be able to get a referendum. I don't think the court should be allowed to shut that down. Now I think when it comes back and it's bad for them, then you use that to shut them down, right? But in my personal opinion, the current administration in power in Canada, they're far more pro like pipeline, oil development, than previous administration. So, if anything, I think you'll see the number of people supporting this decrease because as the government becomes hostile, like oil and what's seen as Alberta's primary business, you see it increase and been stable for the last 8 years under Trudeau. Now. Still the same liberal government, but they do seem to have. Mark Carney is far more open to oil development and pipelines, so I don't see them miraculously gaining support. But I would like to actually have the referendum. Can we do one of those ones where it's like slightly support, slightly don't support, rather than just a yes, no? Because I was reading through some of their the referendum questions that they were gonna. Because we have 9 referendum questions coming up in Alberta later here. I'll probably cover them again in more depth as we get closer. But like they're all yes, no, and like there's more context than just a yes or a no. And when you boil everything down just to yes to this or a no, you don't get a lot of that context. There's a reason that on a lot of online questions it's like slightly support, slightly don't support, neutral. Usually you have at least 5 options. All right, well, I'm going to move on. Got this. I'm going to try and continue to update what I'm talking about. Okay, let's still gonna I gotta remember to stay on the top of this always. So the one thing I want to do next is I wanna look at Alberta's governing system because I've learned a lot about um, how the federal government, but I haven't actually looked at how the provincial governments work at all. I'm going to like I assume there's a lot of overlap, but I want to actually know if they function differently or not. So we can just do this, right? Thinking. Can you explain to me in depth how the Alberta provincial government works? Can you compare this to the Canadian federal government? Can you outline what they do well and what they do poorly against each other? Okay, it did not get the punctuation right. How the Alberta government works. That could be that. Poorly against each other. All right, here we go. Think about that for okay. Let's see. Gotta let it finish. Organize. Ooh, it does charts now. I get to do a chart for this. Doesn't really work for a chart. But it's got to hit the bottom before it formats it. All right, I'll give it a. Where were we? Down here. So I might watch one of those videos after I. Okay. Here we go. Here's a thorough picture of where public opinion stands. Okay, well, gotta go to the right question. This is a meaty topic, so let me break it down into 3 parts. How Alberta's government works, how the federal government works, and then a comparison of strengths and weaknesses. Perfect. That is what I'm looking for. I imagine this second part is going to be a lot of things we already know. Probably a lot of things we know here too. How Alberta's provincial government works. Alberta operates as a Westminster parliamentary democracy, the same system inherited from Britain that all Canadian provinces use. So they all use the same one. It's the same as a federal system, so makes sense. Power flows from the legislature, not from a separated elected executive like in the American system. Power flows from the legislature. Separated elected like in the Americans. What? Okay, let's continue. So the legislator is the body you elect. The separate elected executive? Isn't that also elected? Maybe I'll come back to that. Let's continue for now. The lieutenant governor sits at the top ceremonially. That's the representing the crown. Yeah, this is the whole part of the Canadian democracy. Largely ceremonial position. They don't actually have like legislative authority. They usually just sign whatever they're told to sign, right? It's in Canada, like we based it so much off of the system in England or the UK, where they had a king, and then we used their king in our system, or the representative of their king or queen, depending. And a lot of that is still there, even though it's largely become ceremonial. The role is almost entirely symbolic in practice. Swearing in governments, reading the speech from the throne, and theoretically refusing to sign legislation in extreme constitutional crises. Though this almost never happened. I don't know if this has ever happened. The lieutenant governor is appointed by the governor general, which is the federal one, on the advice of the prime minister. So, yeah, symbolic position that our government has not outgrown. The Legislative Assembly, so this is the House of Commons federally, is Alberta's single chamber legislature, currently with 87 elected members to the Legislative Assembly. We have members of the legislature. Unlike the federal parliament, Alberta has no upper house, the Senate equivalent. Okay, I mean, in my opinion, the Senate has largely become symbolic as well. Was abolished in 1936. Okay, so that's progress, making Alberta's legislators unicameral. I was learning about Denmark. They have unicameral as well. They have no Senate or anything. Bills only need to pass one chamber to become law, which makes the legislative process faster, but also means there's no second chamber to slow down or review potential hasty legislation. You can fix this in so many ways. It doesn't require a whole another aspect of government. Like, just make it go to committee again. force the bill to go through multiple committee stages. There's a lot of things you can do without creating a Senate. Members of the Legislative Assembly are elected by first past the post voting in individual constituents. So this is the first past the post again. I find that system to be very out. A lot of countries now use proportional representation, which is less. You don't have like the individual constituencies. Everyone's vote's the same. You get power based off the number of votes. Very simple. Less. You don't need to break it up into constituencies. There's no first past the post, which in my opinion makes it so that it devalues people's votes. Because if let's say you're in a constituency that always leans liberal, for example, and you want to vote conservative or NDP, but it always leans liberal by such a majority that your vote doesn't matter. Your vote changes nothing. The person who goes to represent you is still the liberal person. Your vote didn't change. And the proportional representation system fixes. It makes everyone's vote equal. I just like that so much more. But this is the same way that our federal government is, right. The premier is the head of government and the most powerful figure in the province. Importantly, the premier is not directly elected by the public. I guess that's the same as the federal, right? They are the leader of whichever party holds the confidence of the legislative assembly, meaning the party with the most seats. Okay, so this is very similar to the federal system. Danielle Smith became premier after winning the UCP leadership race, not a general election. The premier appoints cabinet ministers, sets the government agenda, and exercises enormous control over the legislative caucus through party discipline. So far, the only big difference that I see is that there's no Senate. Between the provincial and the federal government. Cabinet is formally called the Executive Council of Alberta, so this is the same as the federal system. Ministers are appointed by the premier, are collectively responsible for running government departments, health, education, energy, justice, finance, and so on. Cabinet operates on the principle of collective responsibility, meaning ministers publicly support all cabinet decisions even if they privately disagree or they resign. Cabinet is where most real policy decisions are made, often before legislation even reaches the assembly. The official opposition, currently the Alberta NDP. I mean, that is weird because in Canada the primary parties are the Liberals and the Conservatives. NDP is usually a smaller party, but they're actually the official opposition in Alberta. Let's see. Alberta's parliament broken up by party. No, I want chart. Show me. Let's go. Can we just have an image of this? Current party standing. That sounds like that might be looking for. Oh, the House of Commons. That's not going to be what we want. Ooh, but it breaks up each of them. Anyway, so we're just going to move on because I'm not finding what I want. So the NDP is the official opposition in Alberta. And I mean, I did a whole video on the new guy that they elected for the NDP. I don't think he's gonna do well. I'm pretty sure he's gonna do really poorly. I see them losing more ground because the whole process of when they were electing him like that was just not good to watch. Did not inspire any confidence. Okay, so the official opposition plays a critical scrutiny role, questioning the government during question periods, sitting on legislative committees, and providing an alternative governing vision. Alberta's committee system allows members of the Legislative Assembly from all parties to examine legislation and government spending in detail, though the government generally controls committee composition. The public service is the nonpartisan bureaucracy that actually administers government programs day to day, regardless of which party is in power. Deputy ministers run departments and are accountable to their ministers. Okay. Provincial jurisdiction under the Constitution Act of 1867 gives Alberta exclusive or primary authority over natural resources, crucially oil and gas for Alberta, healthcare delivery, education, K-12 and post-secondary, municipal affairs, property and civil rights, highways. The highways suck. They do fill the potholes pretty quick, but I really think a lot of the highways. Provincial courts and postal services. Alberta also collects its own taxes. Notably, it has no provincial sales tax. I have noted. A political identity marker that dates back. Okay, so I've gone into depth on how the Canadian federal government works. Very similar. They have a Senate, second house, that I see as largely symbolic, but what you're gonna do? I'm not gonna go through it. Let's compare them. Okay. Comparing strength and weaknesses. Where Alberta's provincial, government does well. With how similar they are, I don't think we're gonna see a whole lot of differences, but let's see. Responsiveness and speed. With a unicameral legislative and a smaller, more cohesive population, Alberta government can move faster than Ottawa. A single chamber means legislation isn't bounced between houses. When the provinces decide to act on energy policy, taxation, or regulatory reform, it can do so relatively quickly. Resource management. Alberta has historically been effective at managing and monetizing its oil and gas sector, which has allowed it to fund public services without a sales tax and to run surpluses in boom years. The Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund, though critics argue it has been underfunded compared to Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, represents a serious attempt to steward resource wealth for future generations. I'm going to look that one up, because that is the first time I've heard of that. Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund. So, is it a sovereign wealth fund? Because from my understanding, Alberta was running a deficit. It's hard to create a sovereign wealth fund when you're running a deficit. Like, I think Mark Carney's running into that same problem. It's almost impossible to call it a sovereign wealth fund when it's done with debt. But I'll look into that afterwards. So critics argue it has been underfunded compared to Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, representing a serious attempt to steward resource wealth for future generations. Fiscal flexibility. Without the structural constraint Ottawa faces, massive equalization obligations, national defense spending, international commitments, Alberta can be more nimble with its budget. It has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to eliminate deficits faster than the federal government. That's good. Direct connection to citizens. Members of the Legislative Assembly represent far smaller constituencies. I'm gonna hear that word a couple times until I can know.
Constituencies.
Constituent.
Constituencies.
Okay, hopefully that's enough. Members of the Legislative Assembly represent far smaller constituencies than members of Parliament do. In population terms for rural areas, and issues are often more concrete and local. Okay, so that's like Okay, that makes sense because on the federal level, there's like 300 and something seats, 31, I want to say, but I'm not 100% positive. And in Alberta, there's only there's 81 members, 300 343, sorry, are the House of Commons. How many was there? 87. And Alberta, when you look at actual population, like it doesn't represent nearly that much. So, the constituency is so much smaller. Like there's so many fewer people that they represent. Smaller area, you focus on issues of that area. Okay. Let's grab this. I wanna ask a question. Constituents. In Alberta, are you in a different constituency for your provincial election than you are for your federal election? If so, I live in Grand Cache. What constituency am I in federally, and what constituency am I in provincially? Okay, so clearly it's not getting the punctuation. So, like Greenview District 16, I think is the federal constituency. But I don't know what the provincial one. Yes, you are in completely different constituencies for provincial and federal elections. Okay, so like these are whole different borders then. Because federal ridings represent a much larger population than provincial ridings, their boundaries are drawn differently. Federal ridings in Canada generally cover much larger geographic areas, especially in rural regions. Living in Grand Cache, your exact electoral districts are perfect. Constituency riding. That's so much easier. Use that word. Yellowhead. This is a massive federal riding that covers west central Alberta, stretching all the way down into Jasper, Hinton, Edson, and Rocky Mountain House. Okay. What happened to the Greenview District 16 that I always hear? Is that municipal? Maybe that's the municipal level. My riding is Yellowhead. Jasper, Hinton, like all the small towns. Because we have Edmonton to the east, west of Edmonton, and it's all the little towns up there. Okay. Makes sense. Provincially, West Yellowhead. While it shares a similar name, the provincial riding is much tighter geographically. It includes most of the same places, but doesn't stretch as far east or far south as the federal counterpart. Okay. So I'm in basically the same riding as Jasper, Hinton, Edson, all the places south of me. What? No, I don't want that one. I hear that I live in Greenview District 16. Is that the provincial district then? Maybe I should just turn off punctuation. Oh, no, no. Municipal. Local municipal government, not provincial. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so municipal, Greenview number 16. Federal, Yellowhead, West Yellowhead is the riding in Alberta. Hey, beautiful chart. Beautiful chart. Yellowhead, West Yellowhead, Greenview, Ward 1. Which is Greenview No 16. Okay, let's get back to this. Did I finish this one? Direct connection to citizens. Member of the Legislative Assembly represent far smaller ridings than MPs do in population terms for rural areas. And the issues are often more concrete and local. School curriculum, hospital wait times, road conditions. This proximity can make provincial politics feel more directly accountable to every day. Very true. Where Alberta's provincial government does poorly. Boom bust fiscal planning. Alberta's deep dependency on resource royalties makes its budget wildly violent. That makes sense. How are we doing on oil prices? This is probably the thing that affects Alberta the most. I mean, still really high. And the war doesn't look like it's coming to a close yet. We're up over $102 a barrel. I always kind of wonder, did they start the war to increase the oil price? Was that the goal? Because for both Canada and the US, oil is the US is the biggest oil producer in the world, right? Low oil prices isn't good for them, but high oil prices is. Was that part of the calculus? I don't know. Makes you wonder. Okay. When oil price crash, so does provincial revenue, leading to either painful cost cuts or deficits. Successive governments have struggled to diversify the economy away from energy, and the Heritage Fund has been repeatedly raided rather than grown. Oh, what? You can't raid the fund? You can't raid the fund. Come on. This is arguably Alberta's most chronic structural failure. Oil dependence as a province. Yep, makes sense. A lot of places, they make a lot of money off oil, have the same problem. Like the Gulf countries have an oil dependent. And to the US, and I imagine that the states that produce the oil down there all have an oil dependence. Okay, healthcare administration. Alberta has struggled with healthcare delivery for years. Long wait times, emergency department pressures, rural access issues, and turbulent relationships with healthcare workers. The restructuring of Alberta's health services under the current UCP government, which is the Conservative Provincial Party, has been deeply controversial, and outcomes by many measures lag behind provinces like BC and Ontario. Democratic accountability mechanics. With no Senate and extremely tight party discipline, the government of the day faces fewer internal checks. A majority government in Alberta can push through significant legislation with limited meaningful opposition, particularly given how dominant one party tends to be. The notwithstanding clause has also been invoked or threatened in ways that raise civil liberty. The notwithstanding clause, officially known as Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, is one of the most unique and debated mechanisms of Canada's constitutional law. In short, it allows federal, parliamentary, or provincial legislatures to pass laws that temporarily override certain specific rights guaranteed by the Charter. Government wants to pass a law that they know violates a charter right, they can insert a notwithstanding clause into the legislation. By invoking Section 33, the law remains valid, notwithstanding, meaning in spite of the fact that it infringes on a specific right. What? As being invoked or threatened. What it can and cannot override. The clause does not give government unlimited power. It can only be used to bypass specific sections of the Charter. What it can override. Section 2. Fundamental freedoms. Speech, religion, assembly, association. So, is it something where you could override like freedom of assembly in a pandemic, something like that? I mean, I certainly don't like it. Section 7 to 14, legal rights, protection against unreasonable search, arbitrary detention, rights to fair trial. Section 15, equality rights, protection against discrimination based on. These are all things I don't like being overwritten. I'm not a fan of the notwithstanding clause. What it cannot override: democratic rights, mobility rights, language and minority language education rights, requirement that parliament and legislature at least. The 5-year sunset clause. A government cannot use a notwithstanding clause permanently. Okay. Any law that uses Section 33 automatically expires after a maximum of 5 years. This is an intentional political safeguard. So it is designed to use, like in a pandemic, restrict people's rights because of there's a pandemic and a threat of mass safety, and it can only last up to 5 years. I wonder if it was used because federal and provincial elections must happen at least every 5 years. Government that uses the clause is forced to face the voters before they can. If a government is elected and disagrees with the law, they can simply let it expire. Why does Canada have it? The clause was a political compromise born in 1981 when Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau was trying to patriate the Constitution, bring it home from the UK, and create a Charter of Rights. Several provincial premiers, most notably from Western Canada, were terrified that a charter would give unelected judges too much power to strike down laws passed by elected officials. To get the provinces to sign on, a compromise was struck. The charter would protect citizens' rights, but elected parliaments would have the ultimate last word via Section 33 if they felt a court's ruling went too far. So, the provincial government, so that there can be a law passed, the provincial government can disagree, they can create a law with a notwithstanding clause to kind of ignore it, but then people vote on that within 5 years. So it's not a permanent law, Why it's controversial today, for the first few decades after 1982, the clause was rarely used. Outside of Quebec, we used it routinely for language. It was viewed as a nuclear option that would carry too much political fallout if used lightly. Absolutely. However, in recent years, provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and Saskatchewan have used or threatened to use the clause more frequently, sometimes proactively before a law is even challenged in court. Critics argue this weakens the fundamental purpose of the Charter, or does, while defenders argue it is a legitimate tool for democratically elected governments to enact policy without judicial interference. I also agree with the critics and the supporters. How many times has Alberta used the notwithstanding clause? Can you go into detail? Being invoked or threatened in many ways through deliberate concerns. Indigenous relations. The Alberta government's relationship with First Nations has been strained, as the recent court ruling over the separatist petition illustrates. The province was found to have failed its duty to consult. Resource development disputes, treaty land entitlements, and inadequate consultation process have been persistent problems. Alberta has invoked or introduced legislation containing the notwithstanding clause 4 times in its history. However, the political reality of how those 4 instances played out is quite distinct. 2 of those attempts occurred decades ago and either failed or had no legal effect. The other 2 instances happened recently, marking an unprecedented shift in how the province utilizes the constitutional mechanism. 4 instances in detail. We'll go through the 2 older ones pretty quick. The eugenics law lawsuit. Back down. The context: from 1928 to 1972, Alberta operated under a horrific Sexual Sterilization Act, which resulted in the forced sterilization of nearly 3,000 vulnerable individuals, often without their knowledge or consent. In 1996, a survivor named Leah Murr successfully sued the Alberta government for damages, winning a major landmark judgment. Terrified of a flood of massive multi-million-dollar lawsuits from other survivors, Premier Wealth Cameron's government introduced the Institutional Confinement and Sexual Sterilization Compensation Act in March 1998. The bill proactively used the notwithstanding clause to block survivors from suing the government and capped total damages to $150,000 per person. They backed down on this one. The outcome: the public and media backlash was immense, fierce, and overwhelmingly negative. Albertans were deeply repulsed by the idea of using a constitutional override to strip legal rights away from victims of state-sponsored sterilization. Within 24 hours of introducing the bill, a stunned Premier Kell completely reversed course and scrapped the entire piece of legislation. It never became law. Okay. The same-sex marriage ban. Ooh. Back in the 2000s. Had no legal effect. The context: in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Canada was rapidly moving towards legalizing same-sex marriage. Social conservatives with Ralph, the same guy, Helm's government wanted to block this process within Alberta. So Canada's moving towards legalization, and he wasn't having it. A lot. The province passed the Marriage Amendment Act 2000, which explicitly defined marriage solely as union between a man and a woman. Knowing this violated the equality rights in Section 15 of the Charter, the government inserted a notwithstanding clause to protect the ban. The law technically passed, but it was legally meaningless from day one. Under Canada's division of powers, the federal government has sole constitutional authority to define the legal core of marriage. Provinces only control the physical solemnization, the ceremony logic. In 2004, the Supreme Court of Canada officially ruled that defining marriage belongs exclusively to Ottawa. Alberta's clause quietly expired by law 5 years later in 2005 without ever blocking a same-sex marriage. Okay, but they tried. They did try. The back to school. Ooh. Past and active. The Back to School Act, October 2025. The context. Following a long and bitter contract dispute regarding classroom complexity and wages, the Alberta Teachers Association launched a massive province-wide strike in the fall of 2025. Allah. Premier Danielle Smith, UCP government took swift, aggressive action by introducing Bill 2, the Back to School Act, passed in an overnight session in less than 12 hours. The law legally forced striking teachers back to the classroom, unilaterally imposed a 4-year collective agreement, banned further strikes until 2028, and it established steep fines, $500,000 a day for the union for non-compliance. That's not going to go well. Like, if you ever want to discourage people from becoming a teacher, this is how you do it. Right here. This is how you discourage new teachers. I didn't even know this happened. And they can't even strike until 2028? Okay, the outcome. Because forcing employees back to work and stripping their bargaining rights violates the Charter's protection of freedom of association, the government proactively invoked the notwithstanding clause to completely insulate the bill from court challenges. The teachers complied and returned to school, though the ATA launched separate challenges under administrative and labor laws to combat the overreach. Really? Let me grab that one too. Okay. The fourth one. Restrictions on transgender youth. December 2025, passed and active. So these are both passed and active. The context. Throughout 2024 and 2025, Premier Smith's government signaled an intent to pass sweeping restrictions on gender-affirming care and policies regarding transgender youth. When civil rights groups successfully secured temporary court injunctions on provisions by proving they could cause irreparable harm, the government took a nuclear option. Rights groups temporary irreparable harm. Government nuclear. Okay, what's this nuclear option? In December 2025, the government passed Bill 9, the Protect Alberta's Children's Statute Amendment Act. This blanket legislation applied the notwithstanding clause across 3 separate pieces of legislation to completely block courts from reviewing them. Healthcare. Banning puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy for youth under 16. Okay, like, I actually largely agree with that one. And banning gender reassignment surgeries for anyone under 18. Okay. I agree with that. I'll probably look into... I wanna do more of a deep dive into this because I do mostly have a surface knowledge, but the damage you can do to an individual with puberty blockers and gender reassignment surgeries. Especially a child, like when they're an adult, make their own decisions. I don't care what they do, but for kids, um, they're susceptible. They're so much more susceptible to like manipulation, and this can do so much damage. They don't know what they are. They don't know what they want to do. Why are you trying to change them when they don't even know who they are, right? I've never understood that. I actually agree. I like that. Let's see if the other ones get a pass too. I did not like the back to school. So far, this one seems better. Education, requiring schools to get explicit parental consent before using a student's preferred name or pronouns if they are under 16, and giving parents an opt-in choice for any curriculum involving gender identity. Okay. Requiring schools to get an explicit parental consent before using students' preferred name or pronouns if they're under 16. I mean, I don't know if that part is necessary. I feel the school, if the child is using name or pronouns that are not like visually represented, I believe that they should inform, the parents should be informed. Like we see this in the Safety Act in California, where they're fighting over this right now, legislature. I believe schools should inform the parents. I don't know if forcing the parent get explicit consent is necessary. I mean, kids are kids, they'll do dumb things. Like they could be a boy one day, a girl the next. Who cares? They're a kid. The whole consent thing, I don't know if it's necessary, but what's the second part? And giving parents an opt-in choice for any curriculum involving gender identity. I mean, I think to a degree it should be taught that it's a thing. The whole transgender, the whole transgender thing. But I don't know. I mean, if you want to keep your kid out of that type of stuff, I think you have a right to do that as a parent as well. So I do kind of agree with the second part. Still, I don't know how to feel in the first part of that one. Getting it's the explicit parental consent part. What was it? Puberty blockers. That's another thing, but not be today. My list of stuff to look at is getting longer and longer each time. That's not good. How am I going to get through it all? Okay. The last one, sports. Restricting participation in competitive women's and girls' amateur sports to those born biologically female. 100% agree. 100%. Like, in my opinion, if you choose to be transgender, you just don't get to compete in high-level women's sports. Like, obviously, there's a lot of sports which I don't really care, but when it comes to competitive, like high-level competitive sports, if you're transgender, I don't think you should. You can compete in the male sports all you want. I don't care which way you transitioned. You can compete in the male sports, the highest level you want. Just you don't get to compete in women's sports because no matter which way you're transitioning, like one of them's a man, and so there's an advantage that can happen there, and I just don't like it. So I like this one, right? I like this one. I mostly support. So I actually kind of like this one. Why'd they have to fully bulletproof these laws from being struck down under Section 15, Equality Rights, and Section 7, Legal Life and Liberty of the Charter? Bill 9 invoked the Notwithstanding Clause. Furthermore, it unprecedentedly suspended the application of the Alberta Bill of Rights, the Alberta Human Rights Acts into these laws, cutting off almost every domestic legal avenue for critics to challenge them. So they had so much support for this one that they just made it so you can't challenge this law at all. This is just a new law. You don't get to challenge this. I largely agree, and I think this should be a federal law. Maybe the whole we can rework this part, getting explicit parent consent. I don't think you need to get parent consent for everything, but parents should 100% be informed if a child is using different pronouns or... Okay, summary. While Alberta has reached for the clause 4 times, it has only successfully used it to reshape active provincial law twice, both times occurring in a historic, highly controversial 2-month window at the end of 2025 under Danielle Smith. I like this one. I did not like this one. This is how you force teachers to flee your province. Something I wanted to ask along this. Ooh, here we go. Oh, that's right. I was in the middle of this, wasn't I? How much farther? Okay, well, we'll finish this up. Here we go. Where the federal government does well. National coordination on issues that genuinely require coast-to-coast coordination, pandemic response frameworks, national defense, trade negotiations, cross-border infrastructure. The federal government has structural advantages, naturally, can pool resources, negotiate internationally, and set minimum national standards. Those in Canada's Health Act that protect Canadians regardless of which province they live in. Equalization and redistribution. The federal equalization program transfers money from wealthier provinces to poorer provinces, ensuring that Canadians in New Brunswick or Manitoba have access to reasonable comparative public services. This is a genuine achievement of Canada's federalism, even if it's bitterly resented in Alberta. Absolutely, but you might not always live in a have province. If OPEC collapses and they drop oil prices massively, maybe you'll need equalization. Who knows? Judicial and rights protection. The federal government administers the Charter of Rights and Freedom and the Criminal Code, providing a national floor of rights that citizens can rely on regardless of provincial politics. Federal courts provide an important check on both federal and provincial overreach, where the federal government does poorly. Democratic representation of regions. The Senate was designed to give smaller provinces a voice, but it's widely seen as ineffective and illegitimate since senators are appointed rather than elected. Meanwhile, just everything about the Senate sucks. Let's just get rid of it, roll it in the House of Commons, and everything will be better. We can get proportional representation along with that, even better. Meanwhile, the House of Commons is dominated by Ontario and Quebec's sheer population weight. It means Western provinces routinely feel outvoted on matters that deeply affect them. Pipelines, equalization, carbon prices. This is the core grievance feeding Alberta's separatist sentiment. I feel like the current administration in Ottawa is far better aligned on these things. We basically seen in the UK through the Reform Party, one of their big things was to come out against carbon pricing. Non-net zero was one of their big things, and that gained huge support. So I can expect that at least in most of Canada, we will see a similar push. England's similar, Canada, right? Culturally. And so I feel we will see that the whole non-net zero thing start to become more popular in Canada. This is primarily because a lot of the financial pressures people feel in their life can be related back to net zero, environmental concerns, not developing the oil because I don't know, you just didn't feel like it. And so when a lot of the financial stress start to be felt by people, they'll move that way in mind. And this is the core grievance feeding Alberta separatist sentiment. The money, naturally. Bureaucratic scale and slowness. The federal government is enormous. Major infrastructure projects, procurement, fighter jets, naval ships, and policy reforms routinely take decades and billions more than planned. The layers of federal bureaucracy combined with the need to navigate multiple departments, agencies, and Senate scrutiny make agile decision making very difficult. I've noticed. Fiscal transfers and strings attached. When Ottawa funds provincial programs through transfers, it often comes attached conditions that provinces argue override their constitutional jurisdiction. This creates resentment and sometimes results in funding that doesn't actually match provincial needs. A one-size-fits-all approach applies very different provincial reality. I think this is one of the questions on the referendum about trying to pressure Ottawa into removing the conditions on a lot of the money it sends over, because the provincial government feels like it can allocate this wealth better, use this money better without these conditions in place, because like it's a form of government closer to the people. It can do this better, even though if you build conditions for one province, it might not be good in another province. I don't know. I'm still on the fence about that one. The democratic deficit, first past the post at the federal level, combined with the fact that majority governments can be formed with well under 40% of the popular vote. Also the fact that people can just cross the floor whenever they feel like it, apparently, means that large portions of the electorate can feel constantly unrepresented. This problem exists at the provincial level too, but the consequences are more acute nationally given Canada's regional diversity. I'm telling you, proportional representation fixes this. Just a better democratic system. The fundamental tension. At the core of the Alberta-Ottawa relationship is a genuine constitutional design problem. Canada built a federation in which national resources belong to the provinces. National energy and environmental policy is a federal matter. When those two things pull in opposite directions, as they have over oil pipelines, carbon pricing, and emission regulations, There is no clear resolution built into the system. Alberta argues it is being told how to manage its own backyard by a federal government elected primarily by Central Canada. Ottawa argue it has a national and international obligation to address climate change that transcends provincial resource ownership. Both arguments have real constitutional democratic merit, which is exactly why the conflict keeps generating heat. Well summed up. Okay. Some arguments to, I mean, like this is kind of the core of the Alberta separatist movement. Alberta feels like it's being told how to manage its own backyard by a federal government elected primarily by Central Canada. They have issues because we've had multiple pipelines that were like promised they were going to happen and then got shut down. Carbon pricing like directly affects the oil industry more than other industries, obvious reason, and emissions regulation. And that one, emissions are everywhere. But I imagine extracting oil causes large amounts of emissions. You always see that thing burning on top of an oil stack. I don't know what they're burning. I don't know why they're burning it, but they're burning a lot. Okay, there's a couple of other little things I wanted to touch on before I moved on. Yeah, because this one's getting long. What is it? How much is it? What happened? Oh, there was a whole... What was I talking about here? No, we're good. Okay. Thorough breakdown. What is the Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund? The Heritage Saving Trust Fund was established in 1976 to collect a portion of Alberta's non-renewable resource revenue. The mission is to provide prudent stewardship of the savings from Alberta's non-renewable resources by providing the greatest financial returns on those savings for current and future generations of Albertans. Okay, originally 30% of Alberta's resource revenue was fund. What happened to it? This is where the story gets painful. In the late 1980s, oil prices crashed and governments began drawing on the fund to balance budgets. I mean, that's kind of why it exists, right? Critics argue government used the cash as a slush fund and say the fund's revenue should be much higher. A political scientist at Mount Royal University estimated that if we had stayed 30% today, we would have over 60 billion in that fund. Okay, how much is it worth now? As of March 31st, 2025, the market values the Heritage Fund was 27.2 billion, representing an increase of 4.2 billion over the prior fiscal year. The fund investment breakdown includes equity. Okay, I'm not going to go into that stuff. Bottom line, the Heritage Fund is a genuine achievement, a sovereign wealth fund that has generated real return, provides Alberta with a financial cushion most provinces don't have, but it is a shadow of what it could have been had successful governments treated it with the same discipline as Norway. At 27 billion, it's meaningful. At a potential 60 to 100 plus billion, it would be transformative, potentially allowing Alberta to fund public services with investment income alone and reduce its vulnerability to oil price swings entirely. That opportunity, largely squandered through decades of political short-termism, is one of the most consequential policy failures in Alberta's history. Is Alberta expected to run a deficit this year? Can you give me a chart on the deficit or surplus from the past 5 years in Alberta? Let's see if it can do. Let's see if it can do 10 years. Capital. Oh. Question. Back to School Act. Ooh, we got a lot. Going through a lot. It only does this when it's really got to think. Where were we here? Oh. I was surprised how much I supported that one. How much I definitely did not support that one. And these two were so long ago. They didn't even had no legal effect. Back down. And then we currently have 2 passed and active. Okay. Here we go. Yes, Alberta is very much in deficit territory. The numbers are significant. Let me pull the chart together. Chart. Yes. Worst deficit, best surplus. Okay. So they're running a deficit. Ouch. Why are you running so much deficit? How are we in a deficit? Like, oil prices have gone through the roof. And a couple surplus years. Better management, right? And then deficit. Oh, I hate deficits. I mean, the whole 27.2 billion or whatever in their wealth fund doesn't mean a whole lot when you run a $17 billion deficit. 2020, 2021. I don't know who was in charge here, but they should have been fired. I mean, they should have been fired for all of this. Hire whoever did that one. These are projected. Good times ended fast. The government flipped from surplus being driven by falling oil prices, but we don't have that anymore. Costing Alberta's roughly 600. Alberta's fiscal fortune are essentially a mirror of oil prices. Exactly the structural vulnerability critics have flagged for decades. Yeah. So that's the oil boom. These are all oil price fluctuating. Can you not run a province without oil? All the other provinces. Okay. One more question, then I'm moving on. Ready to grab it? Can you go into details about the Alberta's Back to School Act? Wouldn't this cause issues with trying to bring teachers into Alberta? I mean, I think it more cause issues with retention rate. Well, I assume it'll go into all that. Okay, once this is done, I'm gonna move on. What do we want to move on to? I want to look into the Greece economic break. Like, because they had a collapse, right? Maybe I could find a good video on that. I imagine that happened long enough ago. There should be people that go through this. 5-minute history lesson. How a debt crisis ruined Greece. Ooh, economics. I was gonna watch a video from them anyway, right? Is Greece suddenly doing well? So this is like a bounce back. No, 1 month ago. That's very, very different. The origins of the Greek debt crisis. Oh, that's going into like Euro caused Greek crisis. Understanding the financial crisis. I mean, 10 years ago. How a debt crisis ruined Greece. These two I might want. Okay. We are looking at the Back to School Act. So this is one of the things they use the notwithstanding clause on in Alberta. This is a rich and multi-layered story. Here's a thorough breakdown. Background. What led to the strike? Alberta's teacher shortage and classroom overcrowding had been building for years, driven by explosive population growth. By fall 2025, the situation had become a crisis. About 51,000 public, Catholic, and Francophone teachers belonging to the Alberta's Teachers Association walked off the job on October 6, 2025, after members twice voted to reject contract offers. Teachers were primarily striking over two things: pay that hadn't kept pace with inflation, and crushing classroom conditions, overcrowding rooms with students who have increasingly complex and diverse needs. I mean, I think we're seeing this one in basically all of Canada, just because of how they're growing the population through immigration. That you're seeing overcrowded rooms with students who have increasingly complex and diverse. On October 9th, 2025, the Teachers Employers Bargaining Association locked out the teachers, escalating the dispute further. What do they mean locked out the teachers? How do you lock out teachers? From negotiation? They locked out? Okay. Let's continue. The Back to School Act, Bill 2. After more than 3 weeks of canceled classes. 3 weeks? You telling me the kids got a 3-week holiday? That's great. If I was a kid. The government moved decisively. Bill 2 passed early Tuesday morning after a long night for lawmakers in the provincial legislature. The government introduced it the day before and used procedural shortcuts to pass it within a single sitting day. What the act actually did was significant. It forced more than 51,000 teachers back to work and imposed a 4-year collective agreement running from September 2024 to August 2028. It set pay raises of at least 12% over the contract, with 95% of teachers receiving up to 17%. Starting salaries would be at least 70,000, with the most senior teachers earning up to 119,000. Like that, those are decent numbers, right? You mean, like, it does depend on where you are. If you're in like a small community like mine, those are pretty good numbers. If you're in a big city, maybe they ain't so good. It mandated the hiring of 30,000 new teachers and 150 education assistants over 3 years. It prevented teachers from bargaining or striking at any level until September 2028, with financial penalties up to $500 per day for individuals and $500,000 per day for organizations engaged in illegal job action. So it sounds to me like You had the government and you had the teachers, and they're negotiating over a new deal. And at some point, after 3 weeks, the government just goes, "Screw it, this is the deal. Go back to work. This is now law." I mean, like, 3 weeks off the job. But at the same time, like, have to raise 12% over that. And if you got a 2% inflation rate, you're supposed to have over 4 years, then you're beating inflation. So, like, the numbers seem nice. Why wasn't the teachers union accepting the deal? Because, like, the numbers seem fine. It mandates hiring. Okay. Critically, the government invoked the notwithstanding clause, Section 33 of the Canadian Charter Right and Freedom, to shield the legislation from legal challenge. This was the first time in Alberta's history the notwithstanding clause had been used effectively to actually, like, pass legislation. The ATA refers to it not as a collective agreement, but as a legislative imposed settlement. Teachers had no meaningful role in its terms. Indeed, the contract imposed was essentially one that nearly 90% of teachers had voted to reject the previous month. Maybe they'll cover it, but I'm gonna write it down anyway. Joseph. I want to ask why. Notwithstanding clause controversy. This is, I think we touched on this most of the time. Or this is where it gets constitutionally significant. ATA President Jason Schilling called it an abuse of power, saying the clause was not used to protect children or preserve democracy or to address an emergency. It was used to win an argument. Like that. And that's kind of true. A labor relations professor at Athabasca University called it a turning point. What they are signaling is that this bill today is that fair and free collective bargaining for the public sector in Alberta is dead, because they will just do whatever they want to do regardless. Like, is this 3 weeks of kids out of class? Is that what this is? Because if you're actively having children fall further behind in education, there is a necessity to fix this. Like, if this happened over, let's say, like, summer break or whatever, when the kids are out of class, then I don't care how long it goes on. I don't think you should force them into a contract. But if this is actively causing children to lose class time, you do need a solution. You need one quickly. The government's position was the opposite. A spokesperson for Alberta Justice Minister called it a legitimate constitutional tool, one that allows elected governments to act swiftly in the public interest. The ATA filed a constitutional challenge in Alberta's Court of King's Bench. Courts have generally been deferential to provinces invoking the notwithstanding clause, making it an uphill legal battle. And indeed, the ATA request for an injunction was denied. The full constitutional challenge has been delayed and is not expected to be heard until 2027. Is it going to go into this? Okay. The 3,000 teachers dispute, promise or deception. This is where things got particularly contentious after the act passed. The ATA understood and said the government implied during bargaining that the 3,000 teachers were to be hired in addition to staffing already funded in the budget 2025. The government then insisted net new simply meant any increase over the prior years, even including positions already budgeted. ATA President Schilling said, if that was their interpretation, then nothing was new at all. The number backed up the ATA's concerns. Numbers backed up the ATA's. Alberta aimed to add more than 1,000 full-time teaching positions between 2024 and 2025 fiscal year, but only managed to gain 493. I mean, who would have thought you shut down someone's collective bargaining rights and then you have trouble hiring people for those jobs? I mean, I could have told you that was going to happen. The ATA filed a formal labor complaint to force the government to honor what it understood the commitment to be. Oh, yeah. Okay. How all this makes it harder to recruit teachers. The Back to School Act and its aftermath have created a serious recruitment problem, creating several overlapping deterrents for teachers considering coming to Alberta. Teachers are leaving. In the aftermath of the strike, teachers described fleeing loneliness, isolation, and a sense that no one had their back. Some began filing paperwork to be certified in other provinces like BC, viewing Alberta as not a long-term option. The profession's reputation took a hit. Government education policies and relatively lower funding levels are a turnoff for potential recruits, especially in the context of the use of the notwithstanding clause to strip away Alberta's teachers' charter rights. As the ATA president put it, they're going to have to do some serious work to repair the damage that have been inflicted on teachers for the past couple of years, because right now teachers are not going to believe what they have to say. I mean, believe actions, not words, right? Classroom conditions remain dire. A post-strike survey of Alberta's teachers found an overwhelming majority feeling pessimistic about the state of education, with inadequate staffing still cited as a major issue. Classrooms are becoming more complex, and the fruits of the government's promises have yet to be seen. The government's own response to the shortage reveals its severity. Tradespeople and professionals with only 4 post-secondary education courses are now eligible for temporary teacher certificates. What? Tradespeople and professionals with only 4 post-secondary education courses are now eligible for teacher certificates. So they've dropped the bar to be a teacher. A move that university deans of education found deeply troubling, particularly for streams that could certify teachers who don't even have a bachelor's degree in any subject. The NDP opposition called it a symptom of a government that had created an environment that teachers aren't interested in working in. I mean, yes, that, like, you stop them from being able to collectively bargain, nobody's going to want to be a teacher. Where things stand now. As recently as May 13th, 2026, the Alberta government announced $200 million to fund 1,400 more teaching positions for the next school year, using data collected from around 108,000 classrooms to identify the most overcrowded schools. This is a genuine step forward, but it comes against a backdrop of deep distrust between the government and the teaching profession. The fundamental problem is a structural contract. The government needs thousands of new teachers to meet its legal commitments and population demand. But the way it ended the strike, imposing a contract teachers overwhelmingly rejected, stripping their rights to strike until 2028, and invoking the notwithstanding clause for the first time in Alberta's history, has made Alberta a less attractive destination for teachers from other provinces who have a choice of where to work. The government is now trying to expand the pool of who qualifies as a teacher precisely because it can't attract enough certified ones. Whether that solves the problem or compounds it by undermining the quality of instruction remains an open and hotly debated question. That, I mean, that was always going to happen when you strip the rights to collectively bargain. Right? Let's see. It said somewhere that 90% of teachers rejected the offer. Why did 90% of the teachers reject the offer? Because, like, it sounded to me like they were offering decent conditions, right? Pay raises. 95% of teachers receiving up to 17% pay raises. That doesn't sound bad for 4 years. So then why did 90% of them against it? Well, there were really two interconnected reasons teachers rejected the offer so overwhelmingly. One about money and one about working conditions. They're deeply linked but worth separating out. How long does it go? Oh my goodness. I don't know if I'm down to read all that again. Okay. We'll just go through the top part of it. The pay raise didn't come close to catching up with it. Oh, catching up with inflation. On the surface, 12% raise over 4 years sound reasonable, but when you look at what had actually happened to teachers' pay in the decade leading to the vote, the picture is very different. Since, okay, I'm not going to go into it. Basically, was not keeping pace with inflation. They wanted to catch up. The 3,000 teachers wasn't enough, and there were no hard guarantees on class size. The second and arguably deeper reason was classroom condition. This is what made the rejection so overwhelming. Teachers weren't just unhappy about paychecks, they were exhausted and demoralized by what they were being tasked to manage every day. Growing class sizes and the increased complex needs of students are putting enormous pressures on teachers. Alberta stands apart as one of only 2 provinces in Canada without collective bargaining student-to-teacher ratio. Without that in a contract, teachers have no enforcement protection against being handed even larger, even more demanding classrooms. The stress data was alarming. The numbers behind the classroom conditions. Complaints were striking. The teachers and learning international surveys, a worldwide study conducted by the OECD, found in 2024 that Alberta teachers face the highest level of occupational stress among 50 countries participating. Holy crap, don't be a teacher in Alberta. That sounds horrible. 42% of Alberta's teachers reported experiencing high-level stress, compared to 19% of teachers globally. Striking, only 13% of Alberta's teachers felt respected by their government. A decade of broken promises. Underneath everything was a deep well of accumulated distrust. Teachers have been told time and time again that the government will make it right the next time. Well, the next time is here. Teachers felt they had traded salary increases for years, hoping governments would invest more in students. I mean, generally, that's just a good idea for pretty much every government. Investing in students is like one of the key indicators on how your society is going to turn out. And the cycle kept repeating. That disrespect cut deep, telling dedicated professionals that their sacrifices don't count and their votes don't matter. The government counter-argument in fairness, Finance Minister Nate Horner expressed genuine puzzlement. This is the second time teachers have rejected a potential settlement that provided what their union said teachers wanted in response to growing classroom complexity. With 2 failed ratification votes, I am left questioning whether the union fully understands what their members are seeking. If teachers did not want this deal, then why is it proposed by the ATA in the first place? It's a fair point procedurally. The ATA bargaining team did reach the tentative agreement, but the answer was evident in the 90% rejection. So, the ATA reached an agreement. They brought the agreement to the teachers, and there was a 90% rejection. So then why did the ATA bring the agreement? If 90%, like, their point is to get an agreement that the teachers agreed to. If 90% disagree, that is a terrible idea. Bring that forward. The bargaining team was out of step with its own membership, who felt the deal didn't go nearly far enough on either wages or the hard contractual protections for classroom conditions they desperately needed. The rank and file teachers sent a very clear message. They weren't willing to accept promises without enforceable teeth. They weren't willing to accept promises without enforceable teeth, particularly from a government they had reason not to trust. Okay. Let me do a new one. How much is the average teacher in Alberta paid compared to other provinces? What is the average class size in Alberta compared to other provinces? Go. Ooh. Okay, last query, and then we move on. It'd be surprisingly tricky due to varying collective agreements and data reporting methods. So yeah, I just want a basic. How Alberta's compare. For a long time, Alberta teachers were the highest paid in Canada. However, due to a period of wag stagnation, okay, other provinces have closed the gap or surpassed Alberta following recent collective agreements. Alberta's compensation pack currently sits roughly in the middle to upper middle tier among provinces. So the pay isn't bad then. Okay, breakdown. Let's just look at the chart. Alberta minimum salary, maximum salary, like competitive with the other, with all the others, right? Okay. Class size is how Alberta compares. It's heavily restricted by a lack of uniform reporting. Notably, Alberta stopped public tracking and reporting hard provincial class size data in 2019, making the exact statistical comparison difficult. However, we can look at regulatory caps and student to educator ratios to see how crowded Alberta schools are. All right. Caps versus guidelines. Unlike several other major provinces, Alberta does not have a legislative mandatory cap on how many students can be placed in a single room. Ontario strictly mandates hard caps for early education. At least 90% of primary classes, grades 1 to 3, must have 20 or fewer students, and no class can exceed 23. British Columbia and Quebec features hard, legal binding class size limits built into provincial frameworks or collective agreements that scale upwards by grade. Alberta relies on funding framework rather than hard caps. Okay, not going to tell me what I want. Guesstimate. Student to educator ratio. Because tracking methods differ, statistics can only utilize the student to educator ratio, total number of students divided by all educators, teachers, principals, is specialized support staff. Perfect. That's what I want. It is not a direct measure of class size, but it acts as a reliable proxy for systemic crowding. According to Statistics Canada data compiled by the ATA, Alberta has the highest student to educator ratio in Canada, sitting at around 16.78 students per educator. By comparison, national average 13.8. Saskatchewan and BC 14. So these are the provinces that are closest. 14.1, 15-ish. Eastern provinces maintain the lower ratio, dropping close to 11.5 to 13. Takeaway: Alberta public school classrooms are generally considered among the most crowded in Canada. The combination of rapid provincial population growth, lower per student provincial operation expenditure relative to historical baselines, and a lack of legislative class size caps mean Alberta's teachers face some of the highest classroom density. That is not good. I'm going to guess that is the primary reason that they were striking. That is significantly higher than the national average. I think that's not good at all. And then they've created it harder to hire teachers. With that act. Anyway, that's a bad number. Bad number. At least be at the national average. But all right. Well, I'm gonna move on. I've spent way too long. But this, although I did agree quite heavily with am I still talking about the back to school act here? Because there was the back to school act and the transgender act. I didn't like the back to school one, but the transgender one I liked far more. A few times they used the notwithstanding clause. The two active. All right, well, I'm gonna go grab a drink. I'll be back, and we're gonna be moving on to talk about Greece and their economic breakdown, how it happened, and how it's affecting them today. chair. Hit the mic. Still got music. Check. Stream. Fine. The Canadians are tied 2-2 with Buffalo. So I am slightly distracted in a game 7. Back of this. Canadians versus Buffalo, game 7. Just want okay. I can track it here. Third period, 5 minutes left, 2-2. We won't look at that again. I swear. Okay. Let's cut this. New one. Okay. Want a new chat. Can you explain the Greece economic meltdown to me? What caused it? I mean, we just want an overview, right? That should get it for us. Ooh. Ow. Oh, the whole time? So I found out, because I was trying to turn, I'm gonna try and turn some of my content into like shorts and stuff. And so I was looking at creating essentially, I use DaVinci Resolve. And I tried to grab the center of the screen, and this is not in the center of the screen. Little icon over here shifts it all. Bars. It's actually off to the right-hand side of the screen. So I gotta grab more to the right. Weird. Trying to grab it. Anyway, let's have a look. So, we want to look into the Greece economic meltdown. Because we don't want to go through something like that in our own country. Let's learn about their meltdown. Wait. The Greek economic crisis. Greece meltdown. Roughly 2009 to 2018. Wait, you telling me they had a 9-year meltdown? What? This went on for 9 years? Was one of the worst debt crises in modern history. Here's what caused it. All right. Number 1, living beyond its means for decades. Greece consistently spent far more than it collected in taxes. I mean, like, running a deficit. Right there. Running large budget deficits year after year. It borrowed heavily to fund generous public sector wages, pensions, and social programs. The government was essentially funding a lifestyle it couldn't afford. If you have a large deficit, you are funding a lifestyle you cannot afford. That's just how finance. This is what's happening in everything. Right now in Canada, we are funding a lifestyle we can't afford. We've been running consistent deficits. Like, that's just how it works. The euro made it worse. So, from my understanding, a lot of the European Union, or I think all of it, uses the euro as a currency, which is managed not by the country, but by the European Union itself. This means you don't have control over printing. So, in this situation, a country actually functions similar to like a state in the US or a province in Canada. Um, because it is using a currency it itself does not fully control. Um, which means you can't print money and inflate your way out of any issue. As destructive as that is for your people, you don't ever default. When Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001, it suddenly had access to cheap borrowing at near German interest rates. Lenders assumed Eurozone members were safe. Greece took full advantage, borrowing massively at low rates, but without the economic productivity to back it up. Cooking the books. Greece actively hid the true scale of its deficit from EU authorities. With help from Goldman Sachs using complex financial instruments. Oh, great. When the real numbers came out around 2009, 2010, markets panicked. 4. The weak tax collection and corruption. Tax evasion in Greece was rampant, almost culturally normalized. The state collected far less than it was owed, while public sector corruption inflated spending. That's one of the things, like, what was it, like investing in tax collection is one of the best investments a country can do. Because if you invest in tax collection and enforcement, then you actually collect the proper taxes, and usually it's just more than what people usually pay. Because getting around taxes is something that has always existed. This structural gap between revenue and expenditure was never flagged. 2008, global financial crisis as a trigger. The global crash tightened credit markets worldwide. Greece's debt suddenly looked terrifying to investors, who demanded much higher interest rates, which made Greece's debt even more unaffordable, creating a vicious spiral. I think we're seeing a much smaller spiral currently in the U.S. Where their debt looks scary. Trump is trying to bring rates down, right? But I don't know if his central bank is going to listen to it. And it sounds like the rates are gonna stay, if not go up. We demand much higher interest rates, yeah. And I mean, when you have a large debt, you're kind of at the mercy of interest. Like, the bigger the debt, the smaller the change of our interest rate has a bigger effect just because of its size, which made Greece's debt even more unaffordable, creating a vicious spiral. Loss of market access. By 2010, Greece could no longer borrow on open markets at sustainable rates. It had to be bailed out by the EU, EBC, and IMF 3 times, totaling over 300 billion euro. It's crazy. The consequences. The austerity conditions attached to the bailout were brutal. GDP shrank by roughly 25%. Worse than the US Great Depression. Unemployment peaked at 27%. Youth unemployment hit 60%. Pensions were slashed repeatedly. Mass immigration of young, educated Greeks. Mass immigration, so the leaving of young, educated Greeks. Hospital and public services collapsed. Like, if you live beyond your means for too long, this happened. This is not good. Like, these are things that take decades to fix, if they're fixable at all. A shrink of 25% of GDP. Unemployment peaked at 27%. Youth unemployment hit 60%. Pensions were slashed repeatedly. Mass immigration of young, educated Greeks, hospital and public services collapsed. A core problem in one sentence. Greece had the spending habits of a rich northern European country, but the tax collection and productivity of a much weaker economy. And the euro removed the usual escape valve of devaluing your currency. Greece officially exited its bailout program in 2008, though its debt burden and economic scars remain significant to this day. Can you go into more detail about the consequences of the collapse? Also, what issues persist to this day? I wanted to expand on this section, and then I want to know, like, are there still problems because of this? This was 2009. So, looking at a while ago. Let's see. So basically, it didn't have good tax collection. It lived beyond its means, putting everything into debt for multiple years. What was it? Goldman Sachs helped them hide their helped to hide the true scale of the deficit using complex financial instruments. If there's ever a reason not to trust Goldman Sachs, right there. They knew what they were doing. And they did it anyway. Okay, great question. The consequences were sweeping, economical, social, and deeply human. Here's a detailed breakdown. The consequences of the collapse. Economic devastation. The scale of the economic contraction was historic. Between 2009 and the peak of the crisis, unemployment had rocketed to over 27% in 2013. So this is 4 years after the start. This is something that got progressively worse for 4 years. And more than 60% of young adults were left without jobs. By 2015, more than a third of the population was at risk of poverty and social exclusion. In 2012 alone, income had dropped by roughly 50%. Income, so how much people made, had dropped by 50%. What? Something tells me house prices didn't drop 50%. Just what people were making. Greece is the only EU economy that had still not recovered to its 2008 GDP level. Oh, okay, let me start again. Greece is the only EU economy that had still not recovered to its 2008 GDP level, even by end of 2023, sitting at a roughly negative 18.4% of its pre-crisis output, making clear the Greek economic crisis was by no means belongs entirely in the past. So their economic crisis, their economy is still 18.4% lower than 2008. So their economy is not recovered. In what, 18 years? And it still hasn't recovered. That is crazy. That's austerity.
austerity,
Yeah. Definition. Austerity refers to strict, simple, or minimalistic living. Minimalistic living. In economic terms, it describes specific governing policies aimed at reducing budget deficit during financial crisis. So, austerity, a reduction in living standard. Okay. Austerity. 12 rounds of cuts. The government enacted 12 rounds of tax increases. Okay, so they're facing an income drop of 50% while facing tax increases. Why would any of the young Greeks stay? %60 unemployment rate on top of that? Like, that's terrible. The government enacted 12 rounds of tax increases, spending cuts, and reforms from 2010 to 2016, which at times triggered local riots and nationwide protests. The fiscal adjustments required of Greece was by far the largest of any bailed out Eurozone country, more than double what Portugal or Ireland had to endure. They were living that far. I mean, be careful if your government starts working with Goldman Sachs, because they're hiding some. And it could come back to just destroy your country. Healthcare system near collapse. Public health expenditures were cut by 25% during 2008 to 2012, leading to shortages of health professionals, reduced salaries, pension cuts, decrease in medical supplies, and inadequate primary health care. By 2015, only 86% of the population was covered by public health insurance, down from 100% in 2008. Oh, so they started throwing people off their public health care, with the long-term unemployed most affected. Mental health crisis. The human toll went beyond economics. Suicide rates increased by 35%, and the prevalence of major depression rose from 3.3% in 2008 to 12.3% in 2013. Major depression. Okay. Both unemployment and financial hardships were found to independently drive suicidality. Some suicides were directly attributed to social causes rather than pre-existing mental illnesses. Mental health funding was simultaneously cut by 20% in 1 year and by an additional 55% the next. The brain drain, like this is one of the really dangerous ones, and it's one of the ones you don't feel now. You feel 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years down the road when your country suddenly stops innovating completely because all the people that would innovate have left. And you suddenly see no growth. But it's definitely, it's one of the most dangerous ones. It is also one of the few you can turn around. Like if you bring living standards up, you can bring people back. I think we've seen this to a degree in Poland, where a lot of Poles left, and they're actually bringing people, from my understanding, back to the country now. But it's really dangerous. One of the most lasting wounds was mass immigration. Hundreds of thousands of well-educated Greeks left the country. Doctors, engineers, academics, seeking opportunities elsewhere in Europe. This hollowed out the very workforce Greece needed for its recovery. One Greek expat living in Germany put it bluntly: post-crisis, if you don't have connections with government or party officials, it's difficult to find a job. Political radicalization. The crisis destabilized Greek democracy profoundly. The neo-Nazi party Golden Dawn rose to become Greece's third largest party during the unrest, feeding off despair and anger. Golden Dawn eventually collapsed after its leaders were convicted of running a criminal organization, losing all parliament seats in 2009 and dissolving shortly after. The issue that persists today: debt still enormous. At end 2024, Greece's public debt remains elevated at about 150% of GDP. Ooh. So they've been doing austerity for what, 18 years? And their debt is still 150% of GDP. Remember, anything over 70% will start to massively impact growth. It'll be like a wet blanket on top of an economy. One of the highest ratios in the world. While it's falling, it remains massive structural vulnerability. I mean, like, you have to pay your debts, right? And they're still working on it. Wages still depressed. The average monthly salary of 1,175 euros is still about 20% lower than it was 15 years ago, before the onset of the crisis. Greeks are earning less in real terms today than they were before the crash. Unemployment still above EU's worst. The unemployment rate remains the second highest in the EU after Spain. How bad is Spain? And labor force participation remains among the lowest in the EU, especially for women. Bureaucracy and structural weakness. The economic environment remains burdened by bureaucracy, slow procedures, and partial inefficient of sectors of the state. Issues that analysts say must be addressed to create a truly investment-friendly environment. Housing and cost of living. Airbnb has artificially inflated rents in tourist areas like Athens, and many struggle with the cost of living. Young people especially are disgruntled, and many still leave the country to seek better job opportunities. Demographic time bomb. Greece faces an unfavorable demographic outlook. An aging population combined with years of youth immigration means fewer workers supporting more retirees, putting long-term pressure on pensions and public finances. Let me make sure I'm getting this one. Immigration and immigration?
Emigration.
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 Immigrate. This is immigration, the act of leaving your home country or region, permanently settle in an. That's what I figured, but good to be sure. The silver lining, cautionary. There is genuine progress. Greece has staged a remarkable economic recovery over the past 5 years, with growth outpacing the EU average. I mean, it's still at 18% behind its 2008 numbers. A significant rebound in investment, historical high exports, and declining unemployment. The primary budget surplus reached 4.8% of GDP in 2024, achieved not through further austerity but through economic growth and cracking down on tax evasion. Greece returned to investment-grade credit rating in 2023 after a lost decade of exclusion, with borrowing costs now lower than those of Italy and even France. But as one Athens resident summed it up, if you tell everyday Greeks the economy is heading in a positive direction, you're likely to get their hairy eyeball in return. The numbers are improving, but the lived reality of a generation scarred by a decade of crisis is slow to heal. I mean, what a cautionary tale. right there. 18 years after their 18 years after the crisis was initiated, they're still 150% in debt. Their debt is still 150% of GDP. And like they say that the economy is rebounding, but their GDP is still, where was it, 18% below its pre-crisis levels. Holy crap. You do not want this to happen in your country. This is why I'm always scared of deficit spending, right? Because fundamentally deficit spending is living beyond your means. Now, if there's a crisis, like a US trade war on you, pushes your deficit, it pushes you into a deficit, spending deficit for a year or two, I understand, but you always want to be a surplus. You always need to come back to a surplus when times are good. The issue is, for most nations, they deficit spend, and then they just less deficit spend in the good times, but then they go back to deficit spending in the bad times, and it's a downward trend until something breaks. And something broke in Greece, and this is what happened. And 18 years later, their economy is still 18% smaller than it was before the crisis. We do not want that. Ooh, they're in overtime. 2-2. Anyone's game. Game 7. Okay. I wanted to watch How a Debt Crisis Ruined Greece. And we'll have a look at that. Now that
What if I told you?
Now that we have some context. Okay. So, How a Debt Crisis Ruined Greece by Casual Economic.
You that one country's budget mischief triggered a debt crisis that shook Europe and nearly tore the European Union apart.
So those are all the countries in the European Union. I know Norway's like EU adjacent. Yeah, kind of did a stretch down here and got to Greece. Switzerland always tries to stay out of area.
Greece, known for producing some of the greatest thinkers, wars, and culture in human history, its legacy is cemented for having one of the most iconic ancient civilizations. Yep. However, in the span of a few years, the country went from the excitement of joining the European Union and hosting the Olympics to complete economic collapse. But what exactly caused Greece to have Europe's worst debt crisis in the modern day? And could it have been avoided? Let's start in 1999. Europe is riding high on post-Cold War optimism, and the European Union introduces a revolutionary idea: a single currency to unite the continent economically and politically. No more exchanging francs for Deutschmarks or currency fluctuations hurting trade. Just one currency, the euro, to bind Europe together. But there was a catch. To join this exclusive Euro club, countries had to meet strict criteria known as the Maastricht criteria, with a budget deficit below 3% of GDP, total debt below 60% of GDP, and also needed to maintain low inflation.
All good ideas. How many currently meet this? Like, if this is what you have to meet to join, I don't think you have to meet this to continue to be a part of it, because total debt less than 60% of GDP. Debt to GDP map. Okay, let's see if we can find this. Map. Okay. United States 120%, Canada 100 something, yeah, 110. But look, 113, 101, 94, 63. They're just above. 135. Ooh, yeah, that's Greece still at 150, right? These are all members in the EU or above. Above 60. So clearly this isn't a continuous thing. It's just if you want to be part of the club, you have to meet these ones.
And these rules were designed to ensure only financially stable countries could adopt the euro. For most of Europe, this was challenging but achievable. For Greece, it would be nearly impossible. In the late 1990s, Greece's economy was a mess. Tax evasion was rampant, with an estimated 1/3 of economic activity going unreported. And government spending was out of control. Public sector jobs were handed out freely to political supporters, and the number of public employees rapidly rose. Meanwhile, the debt-to-GDP ratio averaged over 102% from 1981 to 1993, nearly double the allowed limit.
Yeah.
Greece faced a lose-lose choice. Either undertake painful reforms and spending cuts to meet the criteria, or painfully watch from the sidelines as the rest of Europe moved forward without them. Missing out on the euro meant economic isolation, higher borrowing costs, and the humiliation of being left behind. Greece chose the third option: cheat.
There was no third option. You just didn't like either of the current option. So rather than making a hard decision, you just cheated.
Enter Goldman Sachs, the Wall Street giant known for creative problem solving. In 2001, Goldman presented Greece with an elegant solution to their impossible problem. Our debt.
Don't take it. Don't take it. It's going to cause problems. It will cause problems. And the problem will be 18 years later, your economy is still 20%, 18% smaller.
It is 105%. The euro limit is 60%. Can you help? We can use cross-currency swaps to move debt off your balance sheet. But that sounds illegal. It's not illegal. It's financial engineering. Our fee is around 300 million euros. Using complex financial instruments called currency swaps, Goldman helped Greece move billions in debt off its balance sheet. On paper, Greece's deficit looked small enough to meet EU requirements. In reality, Greece was simply hiding its debt through accounting tricks, borrowing money
I mean, once you start doing that, something tells me it's gonna be really hard to go back to normal reporting. We see this issue in China, where a lot of their essentially provinces or state level governments were incentivized to make the numbers look good. And so they made the numbers look good. And they did that by creative accounting and, maybe under-reporting or over-reporting a little bit. But then they needed to do it the next year too. And then you had to do it the next year, and you had to do that the next year, and do that the next year. And then all of a sudden, this adds up, and your creative reporting is now a significant amount of the report. And now you got a problem. And they have a problem there, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to fix it. But it is a cycle. Once you start, it's like, oh, we can get away with this. Just like any criminal or any bad deed, once you find out you can get away with it, you go further, and then you go further, and eventually your entire economy melts.
Disguised as currency trades, with the real costs pushed years into the future. And it worked, and Greece adopted the euro on January the 1st, 2001. The early years felt like a dream come true, and people were optimistic. Borrowing costs plummeted, with the euro's credibility backing Greek bonds. Investors treated Greek debt almost as if it were German debt. Money flooded into Athens. The government ramped up spending on public sector salaries, pensions, and infrastructure. Then came the ultimate show.
I mean, like, when you have a windfall like this, the best thing to do is fund a sovereign wealth fund with the win. Like as soon as you start accounting and considering the windfall as just normal operating, that is when you run into problems.
Case. Greece won the bid to host the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens.
Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening in the first overtime. Okay. They're really dragging that one out.
This was it, a chance to show the world that modern Greece could revive its ancient glory.
Okay.
The nation was electric with pride. The price tag? Over 9 billion euros.
How big is Greece? What's the population of Greece? What size are we looking at? 9.9 million people. So 1/4 the size of Canada.
Nearly double the original budget. But with cheap credit flowing and euphoria in the air, who was counting? For ordinary Greek citizens, these were golden years. The economy was booming, jobs were everywhere, and after decades of being seen as Europe's poor cousin, Greece finally felt like its moment had arrived. By the mid-2000s, Greeks were enjoying a standard of living they'd never experienced before. Wages rose, consumer spending boomed, the future looked bright. But underneath the surface, the fundamentals were rotten. Tax collection remained abysmal, government bloat continued unchecked, productivity lagged far behind Northern Europe, and the debt kept mounting, hidden beneath layers of innovative accounting. Soon, the bill would come due. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Banks collapsed, credit markets froze. For Greece, the timing couldn't have been worse. Tourism, one of Greece's leading industries, collapsed as recession-wary travelers stayed home.
In 2008, I guess during the financial crash, everyone was feeling the pressure, right? And so there was just less tourism generally.
Shipping revenues dried up and tax receipts plummeted even further. And suddenly, Greece needed to borrow even more money to make up for its collapsing tax revenues, just as global lenders were getting nervous. Then things would go from bad to worse. In October 2009, Greece's newly elected government revealed the truth. Previous administrations had been systematically lying about the country's finances. Credit rating agencies downgraded Greek bonds to junk status, and interest rates on Greek debt skyrocketed. Suddenly, Greece couldn't afford to borrow money at any price. Finally, Greece's updated numbers. Deficit at 6%, debt manageable. Actually, small recalculation. The deficit is closer to 12.7%, and we may have used some creative accounting with Goldman Sachs. You've been lying to us for a decade. Lying is such a harsh word. We prefer optimistically interpreting fiscal data, and about that debt, we're going to need some help. By early 2010, Greece was on the brink of default. If Greece couldn't pay its massive debts, European banks holding billions in Greek bonds would take massive losses. The crisis could spread to Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Italy. The entire Eurozone could collapse. The Troika, which consisted of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, stepped in with a historic rescue package, 110 billion euros to keep Greece afloat.
What is euro to Canadian? What is €1 to a Canadian dollar? Because I know euros are like they're higher value. 1.6 Canadian. 1.5 times. Okay.
But the money came with
The scale doesn't change that much.
Brutal strings attached. The Troika believed that fiscal discipline would restore confidence, bring debt under control, and set Greece on a path to recovery. The theory sounded reasonable, but the results in reality were catastrophic. As Greece hiked taxes and slashed spending, the economy contracted sharply.
I mean, that is going to happen. And you get into a debt crisis, you got to raise taxes, you got to cut spending, and that is going to slow your
With
economy.
less government money flowing through the economy, businesses struggled, unemployment soared, and tax revenues collapsed even further. The debt to GDP ratio, which austerity was supposed to reduce, actually worsened as the economy shrank faster than the debt fell. GDP fell by 7% in 2011 alone.
GDP per capita. So is this here the 25% drop that we're looking at? Was this section the 25% drop we're looking at? Yeah, because 2008 and 2009. The start of the crisis.
Unemployment hit 18% and kept climbing.
I mean, what did it say? Like 27% was the top.
Thousands of businesses closed.
60%
Young Greeks
for
fled
youth.
the country in search of work abroad, and yet the debt kept ballooning. Greece was caught in a death spiral. Austerity caused a recession. The recession reduced tax revenue, and lower revenue led to more austerity. The antidote had become the poison. Now, Greece wasn't the first country to suffer this fate. Across the Atlantic, Argentina had endured a similar debt crisis just a few years earlier.
Really? Argentina? Excuse me while I write that one down. Okay.
In the early 2000s, Argentina followed IMF-imposed austerity measures,
Yep.
slashing pensions, cutting government salaries, raising taxes. The result?
These are all things that are going to force a contraction to your economy. So basically, when you live beyond your means and deficit spending, it actually grows the economy, and it grows the economy too much, and then when you begin austerity and lowering living standards, it causes the contraction, and it kind of depends on how good your fundamentals are. And apparently they were pretty bad.
Economic catastrophe. The harsh measures deepened Argentina's recession, making debt repayment even harder and trapping the country in a vicious cycle it still hasn't escaped. Since 1956, Argentina has defaulted 9 times and entered 21 separate IMF programs. The pattern was identical. Debt crisis, austerity demands, economic collapse, repeat. Yet somehow, when Greece's turn came, European leaders and the IMF prescribed the exact same medicine, expecting...
I mean, like, it's the only thing you can do. You have to pay back the deficit somehow. And like, I can understand if you push too hard, there's a collapse, and you don't want that. But if you have a huge debt, you have to get into a position where you're paying the debt off and not adding to it. Deficit spending is no longer allowed. And apparently it caused the collapse because they were so dependent on deficit spending.
Different results. By
Can you chart out Canada's deficit or surplus spending for the past 15 years? Let's see. Can I ask for a chart? Will it give it to me? Oh, it's taking its time. Okay. All right. Who won? Oh, they move on. Look at it. Oh, beautiful. No. I'm gonna have to watch. That's great. Okay, It's gonna take its sweet time.
2012, it was clear Greece needed even more help. The Troika arranged a second bailout, 130 billion euros combined with a historic debt restructuring. Private creditors holding Greek bonds agreed to accept a 50% haircut.
Oh. So, one of the issues here is that banks and institutions take on debt from other banks and institutions. And so, when you have a debt crisis like this in Greece, if I assume the financial system is integrated, if you allow Greece to default, you will have a structural problem in banks all across the EU. Anything that's integrated with them and has been purchasing their bonds, suddenly they face the loss of that because of the default. And when that updates in their balance sheet, it could cause structural issues in the institution that is not defaulting. And it could cause a default. This is why they were talking about, this could cause Spain and Italy and Ireland to also enter crisis, because this default could have pushed other banks and other institutions into default. And this is how you kind of get a cascade, because even you see this in the US when one institution fails, all of the other institutions that are connected to it and have like derivatives or have purchased debt from it, they all suffer massively. And this is when you can get a cascade of issues, because one link in the chain was weak, and Greece was the weak link here. And it looks like rather than a full default, they're looking at like a half default, is what I'm guessing.
Writing off half of what they were owed.
Yeah, so they're looking at like a half default, just so that they get to actually keep half, because the alternative is a complete default.
It was the most extensive sovereign debt restructuring in history. More austerity followed. Pension cuts deepened. Taxes rose again. Public services were gutted. Healthcare budgets were slashed. Schools closed. On the ground, Greek society...
that is all horrible. Okay, I wanted a chart. Ooh, who was leading us back in 2014, 2015? We got a 1.9 billion. Oh, was that the COVID spending? Oof. That was terrible. The only surplus was 1.9, and then they've just been living beyond their means. Tiny deficit, or that's like nothing. But every other one, oh my goodness. My goodness. Why could we not have more surpluses? Why do you guys always have to be in the red? I don't like being in the red. So the Harper years, 2009 to 2015. Massive deficit. 2000, when was that? 2008? Oh, I didn't get that one here. Like the Harper years, at least the deficits were low and there was a surplus. And now, past 8 were Trudeau, right? His first term wasn't so bad, and then his second term he just stopped caring. Carney, I mean, like, that's your first one, minus 36.3 billion. That's not what I like to see. I mean, COVID, it's hard to blame someone for COVID. You didn't cause COVID. You were just trying to keep the economy from imploding during COVID. I imagine most countries have that one.
Society was collapsing. Unemployment reached 27.5% in 2013, one of the highest rates ever recorded in a developed country in peacetime. Youth unemployment hit an apocalyptic 58%. Nearly
not quite
1 in
60.
3 Greeks fell below the poverty line. Soup kitchens appeared in Athens, feeding tens of thousands who used to be middle class. An entire generation saw their futures evaporate. The social fabric was torn apart as protests and riots broke out. Far-right and far-left parties surged in popularity. The Greek people felt
I
betrayed.
mean, like, this is what we're seeing largely now. But we're seeing it everywhere. Is Greece like the cautionary tale of what's to come? Because we're currently seeing far left and far right parties surge in popularity. And in all countries that have a high debt to GDP ratio.
By their own government, by Europe, by the banks, by everyone. The human cost of the crisis was staggering. Greece's economic disaster turned into a humanitarian crisis unfolding in the heart of Europe. By 2015, Greeks had endured
like it's opposite side of you. Okay.
5 years of brutal austerity with no end in sight. They were exhausted, angry, and desperate for change. In January 2015, they elected Syriza, a far left-wing party that promised to end austerity and renegotiate the bailout terms with Europe. Their message was simple. Greece had suffered enough. The Troika's medicine had failed. It was time to demand a better deal. For
You
months,
mean like what? They kick you out if you don't pay your debts?
Greece's new government negotiated with European leaders, demanding debt relief and an end to austerity. Europe refused to budge. Banks began hemorrhaging deposits as Greeks feared the worst. Capital controls were imposed. Greeks could only withdraw €60 per day from ATMs.
Really?
Then, in June 2015, Greece did the unthinkable. It missed a €1.6 billion payment to the IMF, becoming the first developed country to default on an IMF loan. The Greek banking system froze. Europe faced a choice. Let Greece collapse and risk contagion across the continent, or offer one more lifeline. After tense all-night negotiations, a third bailout was arranged, €86 billion. But the conditions were even harsher than before.
I mean, they
The
gotta
dream
be.
of defying austerity had failed. Greece had no choice but to accept the deal and continue down the painful path to recovery. By the time the dust settled, Greece's economy had shrunk by 25%, a contraction rivaled only by the Great Depression. Debt to GDP peaked above 180%, higher than at the start of the crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Greeks had emigrated, and an entire
Wait. Move my. So, the crisis is here. 2008, 2009. So, once the crisis started, they still had to take out more deficit spending. Like it's more even, but there's still quite a bit of deficit spending. And then here it's massive.
Hundreds of thousands of Greeks had emigrated, and an entire decade had been lost. So what went wrong? Well, first, Greece's original sin was fiscal mismanagement and fraud, driven by a fixation on the immediate short-term win of adopting the euro at any cost, even by cheating. Hiding debt through Goldman Sachs swaps, cooking the books,
I mean, just don't work with Goldman Sachs. Clearly, if your government starts working with Goldman Sachs, you should be worried.
ignoring structural problems created a house of cards destined to collapse. Second, the Eurozone's design had structural flaws that constrained weaker balance sheets. Countries sharing a currency couldn't adjust exchange rates or print money during crises. Greece was stuck with a one-size-fits-all monetary policy designed for
I
power.
mean, like, at the same time, their boom was because they joined the Eurozone, but it's also what stopped them from being able to fix their problem. Because if you just print and devalue your currency, it does help. Like, you could have escaped without this much damage. It devaluing your currency does, it prevents your people from, well, prevents their money from going further, right? But it can stop a collapse. This is why countries that have their own currency are just structurally so much more stable. When you look at a country in the Eurozone, you actually got to consider it kind of like a state or a provincial finance, rather than a sovereign country's finance. They don't control their own currency.
Powerhouse economies like Germany, not for its own very different needs. Third, austerity during a recession is economic malpractice.
Oh, like that. When a recession hits, this is when you spend. And then you do the austerity when you're in the boom times, and you do austerity when you're in the boom times, and you do spending when you're in the bad times. This is how a government is supposed to, like, take the wild swings out of an economy and give people a more stable standard of living, that you hopefully stable standard of living that goes up is the goal. You get booms and you get busts, but it's usually on an upward trend. And so you try and taper that, but governments are not good at that.
Cutting spending and raising taxes in the middle of an economic downturn doesn't restore confidence.
No.
It deepens the recession. Greece needed stimulus and investment, not austerity. But the Troika...
Like, how do you, when the crisis is debt, you can't allow them to go further into debt. This is a debt crisis. Debt doesn't solve it.
dominated by creditor nations worried about moral hazard, demanded harsh cuts anyway. Finally, when you prioritize saving banks over helping people, you get political chaos. The bailouts rescued European banks holding Greek debt, but ordinary Greek citizens paid the price.
Yeah.
Greece officially exited its bailout programs in 2018, but the scars remain. Unemployment, though improved, is still high. Debt remains crushing. An entire generation lost its prime earning years. Greece's slow recovery proves that economies can survive near-death experiences, but prevention...
Greece's experience, like, okay, let's hear him say that one more time.
Recovery proves that crushing. An entire generation lost its prime earning years. Greece's slow recovery proves that economies can survive near-death experiences.
Economies can survive near-death experiences. I mean, I personally think you would have been better letting it die and then just starting again. But maybe, maybe the near-death experience is preferable. I don't know.
But prevention is better than a cure. Strong institutions with sound fiscal policy, transparency, and accountability, not only foundations of economic stability.
This is why the derivative market scares me so much, because there's just zero transparency, right? I mean, you can have all the sound fiscal policy and strong institutions. If so much money is just being used in untransparent markets, it can still cause massive damage. We also see this in what is it? Private equity. All the money in private equity, you have no idea how much of that is bad. some of the things you hear coming out of there. Oh, this company bought this company, and then all the money they spent on it, they transferred that as debt to company A. And then they gave the company A more debt because they wanted to take a profit. And all of a sudden, company A is so in debt that it has no chance of survival. And it's left to just go bankrupt with all the debt. And then, like, it's not like that money disappears, right? When there's a debt, when that money went somewhere. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that too much today. But transparency is very important, and I am very skeptical of untransparency. But I think a couple more things I want to add to my list. Private equity. I'm gonna look into that more. And derivative market. The two untransparent ones that I think we might have problems with.
But also human prosperity and well-being.
Yes.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our previous video covering Japan's lost decades and how a promising superpower that seemed to have everything going for it fell into decades-long stagnation.
Natural economics. Oh, I wanna post the video. And post. Oh, perfect. Okay. Let's have a look. How Norway built a perfect economy. How did the Great Depression affect Europe? These are good. And they're the right length. Oh, he's only got 8 videos out over 2 years. Look, his style's come along a long way. But he hasn't posted right. That was a good one. I like that one.
Greece is one of the.
Oh, I'm gonna watch this one too. Probably the last video. I'm gonna go up and grab a drink first. Put this there. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. Careful. Chair keeps hitting the mic whenever. I'd be like, I don't know, the mic's at max extension right here. I don't know. Like max extension up over there. So I could always move it to like here, but it's gonna be more in the way there. I don't. Okay. So this one looks like Greece suddenly doing well. It might be. Oh, 2 years ago. Okay, so this is a decently old one. This might be talking about the turnaround when we were looking at Greece. We were reading that current economic numbers are really good, going in the right direction. Still 20%, 18. Sorry, I always cut it to 20, but 18% lower. Their GDP is 18% lower than it was at its prime, 2008. So let's see what they got to say about it. Check the stream. Okay, everything's going well.
Greece is one of the most important economies in the world, and that's not because of its size, where it's just middle of the pack, even within Europe, but rather how it has influenced the modern global economic landscape in more ways than even the country itself probably realizes. Global trade, which has become one of the defining...
Is it the cautionary tale for every country that we're all ignoring? Because it was so long ago now that we need another country to sacrifice itself, the debt gods, so that we can all see how horrible it is and then become fiscally more responsible.
Characteristics of our modern world is overwhelmingly handled by ships from just one country.
Hopefully it's not Canada that gets sacrificed. I mean, like, if we're looking at the sacrifice. Go. Net debt to GDP. Yeah, these are debts. Debt to GDP doesn't capture the whole. Okay. You know what? We're gonna try and use this one. Klon. What countries have the highest net debt to GDP ratio? Are any countries in risk of a Greece-style collapse? Let's see, who are we sacrificing to the debt gods? Ruminating on it, thinking, okay, while you think, we'll continue.
Greece is also at the center of tensions between the most powerful military alliance in history, and this otherwise unassuming country has contributed and perhaps challenged a lot more than that as well. Of course, today Greece is as well known for...
I mean, like, beautiful place. Like, the ancient Greeks knew how to pick a spot for their temple and their Colosseum. Or that's not Colosseum. Stadium. What a nice looking place. Okay. I didn't ask you, I asked you. Here we go. It knows I like charts now. So Sudan, I think that's a pretty small country. Singapore, really? I thought Singapore was fiscally responsible. It's not. Venezuela, Greece is still really high. The big economies, Japan, 230% of GDP. Greece is still high. I don't know. Italy? That's a dangerous level. Are these net debt numbers? Canada. I don't like that. Okay, let's see what it says. The headline numbers, 2025 IMF data. Global debt has hit 111 trillion in 2025, equal to about 94.7% of world GDP. We're almost at 100% of world GDP, guys. Doing bad. Japan remains the most indebted major economy at 230% of GDP, reflecting decades of fiscal stimulus and aging demographic. Who's actually at risk of a Greece-style collapse? Here we go. A Greece-style crisis requires a specific cocktail. High debt, inability to control your own currency. Oh, yeah. Inability to control your own currency. Rising bond yields, slow growth, and a lot of market access. Here's how the main candidates stack up. France, the most watched right now. France, debt to GDP ratio stood at 104% as of Q1 of 2025, third highest in the Eurozone after Greece and Italy. All three major rating agencies have downgraded French sovereign debt in the past year. The IMF projects France debt will rise towards 130 by 2030, diverging from the consolidation path of most of the Eurozone. Debt servicing costs are expected to surge to 59.3 billion in 2026, up from 36.2 billion in 2020. And France continues to run a primary budget deficit with no clear political path to fix it. The political gridlock under Macron makes reform very difficult. Uh-oh. Danger, France. That's a danger. Italy. Stabilizing but fragile. Counterintuitively, Italy is actually improving. Italy has undergone a gradual but increased convincing rehabilitation. Its debt trajectory has stabilized. Debt maturity is long. Refinancing risk is contained, and it achieved a primary surplus and reduction to its deficit to around 3% of GDP in 2025, exiting the EU's excessive deficit procedure. Italian bond yields, while still elevated, are near the lowest spread versus German bonds in 2 decades. Lebanon, Sudan, Venezuela, Mozambique. These are already in various states of collapse or default, just not making headlines the same way Greece did because they lack the Eurozone dimension. Oh. So we got a bunch of countries in collapse. Huh? I like to look at collapsing. We will put you Argentina. Countries I should as a cautionary tale. Why another Greece-style drama is harder to repeat in Europe. The institutional landscape has changed substantially. The EBC, European Commission, and ESM now provide institutional backstops that didn't exist in the same form during the 2010 to 2012 crisis. So they've learned. Okay, don't let JP Morgan hide your debt, because that causes problems. The EBC, the ECB can intervene in bond markets to prevent runaway yields, which is exactly what prevented Italy and Spain from imploding during the 2022 rate hiking cycle. Oh, so they've already done this in Italy and Spain, which is probably why Italy was in that I don't know what they called it again. But they were in a program to control deficit spending. That said, the OECD warns that rising interest payments, persistent budget deficits, and falling inflation are expected to push the OECD debt to GDP ratio higher in 2026, and 42% of all global sovereign debt matures in 2027, meaning debt underwritten during near zero interest rate periods will need to be refinanced at today's higher rates. That refinancing wave is the next big test. The short answer, France is the country most worth watching for European fiscal stress, while Japan remains an extraordinarily long-running experiment in whether a country can sustain 230% of debt indefinitely. So far, yes, because nearly all Japanese debt is held domestically in yen. So, we will continue that experiment. I do hope nothing goes wrong with that one. Or France. I mean, we don't want another the debt issue like what happened in Greece. I imagine if I look into these, I will get plenty of cautionary tales. But the general deficit spending is too large. What is it? We're almost at 100% GDP worldwide. Not good, and my country keeps doing deficit spending. I don't get it. I don't get it. We should be balancing the budget. All right. We only got 30
For
seconds.
its economic challenges
Let's
as it is
continue.
for its beautiful islands and historic landmarks.
Like, look at the beauty. Look at the beauty of Greece.
The country has been the poster child of national mismanagement over the past 2 decades. From its peak in 2008, it was the epicenter of the Eurozone crisis, as badly thought out plans in this country rippled across the entire region, causing a decade of stagnation in the world's second largest economic
Sounds a
entity.
little high.
Now, while Greece is not exclusively responsible for Europe's economic troubles in the 2010s, it did play a big part, and it certainly felt the brunt of the slowdown. Before 2008, Greece was one of the fastest growing major economies in the world, with a GDP per capita that
So it entered sorry. So it entered 2001, and then they got the really good interest rate, and they're like, spend, baby, spend. And look at the line. Look at the line as they spend, baby, spend. Spend, baby, spend. Like you got yourself a nice chart that kind of goes up like this, and if it kept going up like this, you'd be about here. But all of that was just spent on debt.
tripled in just
so
8
look what
years.
happened.
The country was capitalizing on the new Eurozone
he
to
didn't
take
show the
advantage of its
chart.
highly desirable tourist destinations, natural resources, and shipping infrastructure. It was also building at a rapid rate as money flowed from the government as well as local and foreign investors who all wanted to carve out their part of what was predicted to be an ongoing economic miracle. But of course, it wasn't, and the debt of the country and its people had incurred to grow at such a rapid rate came back to bite them when the cash dried up after the global financial crisis.
Yep.
The country was one of the worst hit by this global economic shock, and the country was one of the worst hit.
I mean, that looks like a nice place. Why haven't they fixed the roof? That's a really nice place. I mean, it's a great looking place. The roof to just fix the roof
By
and
this
sell
global
it.
economic shock, and a lot of the economic factors that had allowed it to grow so quickly also contributed to its rapid decline, with economic output halving in the country over just
I mean, look at that. How wealthy do you gotta be to get your house built there? I mean, I say house, but it looks like it's like 6 houses all attached together. 7, 8 houses maybe. A lawn on a roof of a house. And it looks like you have like an hour walk to get down to your car. I don't think you can bring your car up, can you? No. That looks like a footpath. I mean, other than that, that looks like that's an amazing place.
5 years. Beyond headline economic metrics, unemployment hit almost 25%, contributing to significant political and social turmoil. But that might now, after 15 long years, be starting to turn around. Growing any economy in a sustainable manner is incredibly difficult, but
Yep.
regrowing an economy that has already been rich is in many ways much harder still. Despite this, in the first time in over a decade, things are starting to look good for Greece thanks to a combination of assistance from its peers, stable economic management, and other global shocks that have strangely worked in its favour. If Greece can regain stable economic growth, then it will also serve as a great template for other economies suffering from prolonged economic difficulties. So, what caused the Greek economy's massive boom and bust? What caused its economic stagnation to last for so long? And finally, what are the factors that are starting to turn these challenges around? Once we have done all of that, we can put Greece on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. Some of the first videos we made.
Oh, I have not updated. Many times as I say it, it's just not how it goes. Pieces. Give me a second. I'm gonna probably let this
made on Economics Explained were about the economies of video games, and I still play my fair share. One I've been playing a lot recently is World of Warships, so I'm stoked for them to sponsor this video.
Timing.
It's a PC 12v12 battle arena game where you fight with massive naval vessels with big cannons. It's incredibly satisfying to aim your cannons and watch the shells fly over kilometers and smash through the hull of an enemy ship. I've put in my hours with other MOBA games, but in World of Warships, there's no messing around farming lanes for 45
tank
minutes.
version of
It has
this.
much shorter
I've played that a
games
little
that
bit.
cut straight to the PvP fights. But it still has a ton of customizability, with over 600 ships from cruisers to submarines and aircraft carriers, to make every game require some strategic thinking to avoid getting outgunned. You don't have to memorize a bazillion hotkeys either, so the learning curve isn't as steep as other
I
games.
like bazillion hotkeys, okay? I was a WoW gamer. I need all the shift, all the buttons, the control, all the buttons, the alt, all the buttons. Give me all the
Games in
hotkeys.
this genre.
Come on.
And because it's free to play, it was easy to convince my friends to pick it up and play together,
play is
and
always
now we're all
nice.
hooked. If you click on my link in the description to play World of Warships on PC, you can use the code HPPYNWYR2024 to unlock a pack of extra doubloons, credits, a free ship, some camouflage skins, and 12 days of a premium account. And if you see a ship called Economics Explained in-game, get ready to lose.
Shoot it.
The economy of Greece wouldn't get as much attention as it does if it wasn't for the rapid growth it experienced in the early 2000s.
Well, I mean,
There-
like, the growth caused the collapse, right? Like, the growth was them deficit spending massive, and that
There are
is
lots
what
of countries
came
in
back
the world
to
that are doing far worse than Greece by almost every economic metric, but the
share of population living below national poverty lines. Really, there's no data on Canada and the US, huh? Ooh. And this is the national poverty, not even like.
tragedy and subsequent intrigue about this particular economy is because, for a while, it looked like an unlikely success story. Unfortunately, the development of the Greek economy in the early 2000s was mainly centered around all of the right industries for all of the wrong reasons. Shipping is one of the core industries of Greece. Since ancient times, this region has spread its influence over the oceans, and that has carried through to the modern day. Greece has the largest merchant marine fleet in the world, and only one other country, Japan, even really comes close. Almost a quarter of all global freight
Wasn't
capacity
China
is
close?
based in Greece.
Vessel share of total DWT. Domestic world trade. Well, I think the only thing that makes sense to me. Yeah, but the numbers,
Only one other country, Japan, even really comes close. Almost a quarter of all global freight capacity is based in Greece. The country built this lead in the aftermath of the Second World War. At this time, Greece had been devastated by occupation, and most of its infrastructure lay in total ruin. To make matters worse, a power vacuum formed after the German forces evacuated from the country, and fighting broke out between Greek power blocks. Now, of course, this period is incredibly complex, and the details are best left to the actual geopolitical experts on our sister channel Context Matters, but from a purely economic point of view, developing industries within the country at this time was going to be incredibly difficult.
Context. Maybe we'll look them up. Because so far, so we're watching an infographics video. They're actually rated quite highly, so.
Because most of the country's resources were being dedicated to just rebuilding what existed before the war. There was an opportunity, however, to develop a national industry that wasn't strictly within the nation itself, one that wouldn't be at the mercy of crippled infrastructure and political unrest. An industry that would actually benefit from the conditions of the post-war period, and that was, of course, shipping. After the war, there were thousands.
Ooh. Look at that. So this is your shipyard. How do you even get that thing in the water? Oh, look at how tiny these little things are compared to it. These are like containers. Are those people? A person there? These things are massive.
Of ships that were used to ferry supplies to military efforts that no longer had any use by the world's navies. These surplus vessels were purchased by emerging shipping families who had mostly fled the country during the war and had become established in the USA. Having US dollars made it easier for these families to purchase US ships, mainly a class of vessel called Liberty ships, which were the basic cargo ships used by the Allies during the war to ferry supplies across the Pacific. To this day, Liberty ships remain the most mass-produced ship of all time.
So that's where, during the Second World War, there was a huge increase in ships. Construction just to ferry supplies over to the war from North America, and like they had a pretty high. A lot of them got sunk too, German U-boats, right? But they built more because many of the supplies got through, and this is one of the things that happened to them after the
At the height of the war, US shipyards were building 3 of these massive vessels every single day. After the war was over, the Allied navies no longer needed these vessels, so they were practically given away to surplus buyers based in the USA, and even though the Greek families that had moved to the US during the war were going to use these ships for Greek shipping companies, that was good enough for the US Navy so long as they reserved the right to commandeer them if war broke out again. The details were fascinating, but what it all meant was that...
Ooh. That aircraft carrier's got a bunch of seats set up. This one's clearly in the show and tell stage. They're showing it off, and they got tourists coming in probably.
Were fascinating, but what it all meant was that Greece was in a perfect position to capitalise on the global trade boom right as it was getting started at the end of the Second World War. The only problem was, this industry kind of sucked. Maritime taxes for ships registered in Greece was very high, as were the salaries demanded by Greek sailors. The Liberty ships were also made with a quantity over quality mindset, and they were prone to snapping in half after too many rough crossings of the Atlantic.
Yeah, they were made for one shipment, you know? A lot of them were going to sink anyway, so...
Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, it's clear that Greek shipping companies did figure out a way around these problems, but it's how they did it that says a lot about the nature of the Greek economy, even to this day.
Okay.
Their first step was to phase out the Liberty ships for custom-built cargo transports made by the shipyards in the UK that were desperate for work after the end of the war. The next step was to ditch the Greek flag registration and sail their ships under the flag of a country with no taxes on maritime activities.
Absolutely.
These are known as flags of convenience, because since ships aren't tied to one place, it really doesn't matter where they are registered. For the same reasons, they also ditched the Greek crews in favour of whoever would work for the lowest cost.
Indonesia, Panama, China, Japan. Fleet strength. So these are their fleet strengths. So this is where they're registered.
Another business practice that Greek shipping companies became infamous for was not being too concerned about what was being shipped or to whom. Even today, while Greece accounts for a massive share of the global shipping fleet, it's really a Greek operation in name only. Most of the ships trade foreign goods under foreign flags between foreign countries with foreign crews, all to make the most profit possible for foreign investors. A lot of Greek shipping isn't even managed from Greece anymore, as operations have moved to countries like the UK, Singapore, and even Norway. Greece's presence in the EU is really the only...
How do you call them Greek? If Nothing is Greek about them.
Anything keeping these ships in any way related to Greece.
Okay, he just explained that.
Anything keeping these ships in shipping isn't even managed from Greece anymore, as operations have moved to countries like the UK, Singapore, and even Norway. Greece's presence in the EU is really the only thing keeping these ships in any way related to Greece. The industry has massive influence in the country, and they've used that to push favourable trade conditions and considerations for their ships, while only contributing about 1% of economic output. Now, the
Ooh,
story of Greek shipping
That's not the kind of industry you want. I'm just going to be honest with you. That industry does not sound like it pays its fair share.
and how it evolved with global trade over the past half century is fascinating in its own right. But the way it grew so large while providing so little real value to the Greek economy is something that is common amongst not just shipping, but most of Greece's major industries. The growth boom of the early 2000s was mostly driven by construction. The adoption of the euro also helped to develop other industries like tourism and manufacturing. The Greek drachma, which the euro replaced, was a highly unstable currency, which made planning long-term business deals or even a holiday surprisingly difficult. The real benefit of the new currency, though, was that it made borrowing money from abroad far easier. The economic boom of the early 2000s did about as much real good for the Greek economy as its shipping industry. On paper, it looked very impressive, but in reality, most of the benefit was not got.
Let's see if we can map this out. So if we follow the casual increase line, where should, like, there's a dip there, so where should it be? I mean, after their boom and then their bust and stagnation, I mean, they're kind of where they would have been. Oh my gosh, this is the evolution of debt. I'm not even looking at the right chart. So they enter the Eurozone, debt explodes. Absolutely explodes. They get low interest rates, their debt just goes through the roof. Where is it? 2008, 2009 is the beginning of their debt crisis. Their debt still goes up from there. They've kind of brought it down thin.
Going to the country itself. Most of the debt taken on was put into developing infrastructure, which could be a good investment, only most of this infrastructure was not going to support long-term sustainable industries like manufacturing, services, or even tourism. They were going to support the development of houses for local and foreign investors to speculate on. In the years between 2000 and 2008, net inflows of foreign direct investment accounted for as much as 2% of all GDP, which means, in a sense, every year, 2% of the country's total output was being sold to foreign investors. Now, again, foreign investment can be a great thing for an economy if it's used to build out industries that will contribute to employment and value creation in the future. Unfortunately, in Greece, most of this money was going straight into buying homes on the coast. Building a home will increase economic output quite significantly on paper, because a home is a major good being produced. It's also great for employment because building even a basic house will keep a lot of workers busy for a long time, and that's before considering the extra production that comes from building roads and plumbing systems and electrical connections to service this new home. The problem with economic growth achieved this way is that once it's built, whoever lives in that home probably won't need a new home for a long time. That home also doesn't produce anything that can be traded to pay off the ever-expanding debt that Greece was taking on to fuel this economic bubble. And to make matters worse, just like the shipping magnates, people working in these industries were not too keen on paying any taxes. This whole scheme probably could have kept on going longer than it did, but the global financial crisis meant that the new homes that Greece was busy building and selling to anybody who would buy them were worth a lot less than they were in the years before, and the country found it much harder to keep on borrowing because most major economies around the world at this time wanted as much money as they could get on their hands to support their own economies, so giving loans to a country like Greece was low on their priority list. These challenges combined to kick off the Eurozone crisis. The millions of workers that have been employed in the country's building industry were mostly out of work. The country had to impose austerity to manage its debts, and since it had adopted the euro...
So this is, they're in the EU, the crisis happens here, and it is just a decline. Like it's not even instant, it's the employment is a slow drop.
it couldn't even devalue its own currency to try and make things like tourism more affordable. The euro gave Greece a great opportunity for development, but it was just a tool, and like any tool, it could be used to do a lot of good or a lot of damage if not managed correctly. Tragically, the country shouldn't have even really been allowed to adopt the euro in the first place. When the currency was being rolled out, new members had strict requirements about how much foreign debt they were allowed to hold. Last month we explored how this caused Italy to spend almost half a decade cleaning up their act to get into this club. Greece again took the same approach as its shipping magnates and just tried to cheat its way around it.
I mean, I was like looking at Greece. Look at that.
Approaches its
What a place.
shipping magnates and just tried to cheat its way around entry requirements into the euro. If it wasn't for a bit of creative accounting, it may not have had the opportunity to ditch its own currency for another decade. This also meant that the debt problem in Greece in the lead up to the crisis was a lot worse than the headline figures would suggest. Either way, the decade that followed the initial crash was incredibly rough. The heightened unemployment caused more drain on overly generous welfare systems, which in turn worsened the government's budget problems. When the country made the obvious decision to lower spending on these programs and chase up on tax dodgers more diligently, it caused major social issues with demonstrations in Greek cities making headlines around the world. This also hurt industries like tourism, which remained fairly stagnant in the country over this time, despite the general growth of
Wow, place is beautiful. We're looking at Greece tourism statistics. Spending in millions, percentage of exposure. Well, spending in millions is what you look at. What's the drop?
tourism worldwide. Now, raising taxes and lowering spending is normally the
COVID.
last thing an economy wants to do during bad times,
Yep.
because it means that there is less money circulating around the economy for the few businesses that are left to employ people and produce value. But in the case of Greece, it was a necessary step towards regaining creditworthiness, and as bad as it sounds to say, get their people to move into industries that may pay less, but will be more sustainable long term. People working in the construction industry before the collapse in particular were making incredibly good money by building the houses and infrastructure fueling the unsustainable boom. It takes time and some fiscal motivation to get workers used to making a lot of money in an unsustainable way to take up work in a more sustainable industry where they will be earning less money.
Yeah.
But that has now happened. Unemployment in Greece is still high, but it's far lower than it was half a decade ago, and it's improving. The debt burden of the country has been managed, and thanks to a series of bailout measures from international organisations and some debt write-downs by private banks, combined with more careful government budgeting, the country is now considered creditworthy again. The global pandemic has also been in many ways a blessing in disguise for Greece. Sure, it hurt the economy from losing tourist revenues and a general slowdown in trade and industry, but other countries in the EU were hurt more, and the low interest rates rolled out to combat the impact of the slowdown also helped Greece get its other problems in order. Greece may take a long time to get back to the level of economic prosperity it was enjoying in 2007, but that's kind of the point. Slow and stable economic development is
Like, look at these places.
exactly what the country
What
needs.
history this
And
place
if
has.
it can recover with this more measured approach, then its economic success is likely to last a lot longer than it did in the past. Okay, now it's time to put Greece, one of the most infamous economies of the last decade, on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. Starting as always with size, Greece currently has a GDP of $219 billion US, making it the 54th largest economy in the world, just behind Kazakhstan. That is again predicted to grow quite significantly over the next few years, so hopefully we can give it a better score when we explore this economy in the future, but for now it gets a 6 out of 10. That GDP is spread out over a declining population of 10.4 million people, which means it has a GDP per capita of $20,732 US per year.
That's higher
That
than
is
the
a
population I
significant
was
drop
looking
from
at.
its all-time high of over $32,000
This is 2 years
in
old.
2008, especially when accounting for inflation. Even though it's still roughly double the global average, it's really stretching what would typically be considered an advanced economy, so Greece gets a 6 out of 10. Stability
pretty
and
high.
confidence is obviously terrible, but it's also all relative. By European standards, the country has been plagued by reckless borrowing, political instability, and general economic mismanagement, which has got a lot of global attention because it's caused a lot of harm to its Eurozone peers. Even still, by global standards, there are countries that inspire far less confidence because they are far less stable. Greece gets a 5 out of 10, which is
Middle
not
of the
great,
road.
but is fair considering that it's still a democracy, still using the world's second most recognised currency, and has even made progress towards resolving major issues that caused this instability in the first place. Growth is simply a 0 out of 10 because the country has gone backwards over the last decade for all of the reasons that we've
Minus
explored in this video.
18%.
Industry might be the most interesting component here. Greece does technically have the world lead in one of the most important global industries, shipping. But given the nature of this industry and the influence that it's had over the
It's not
country,
really-
not much of the benefits flow back into the domestic economy. Even still, with the addition of tourism, high-end agriculture, and a healthy supply of natural resources, it still gets a very strong 7 out of 10.
Okay.
Altogether, that gives Greece an average score of 4.8 out of 10, which is obviously not great, but might still be higher than most people would expect, which is a fantastic demonstration of all economic challenges being relative. Now, there were a lot of similarities between the Greek and Italian economy that we didn't want to repeat here.
Okay. So, the Greek economy does appear to be moving in the correct direction. They're still 18% lower than they were in their prime. Which sucks. Economics explained. You're already here, right? Yeah, you're at the top. I like it. Economics. Okay. Well, that was a good video. I think I'm going to be getting off. The list of thing that talked about is getting longer faster than it's getting shorter. I think that's just natural, right? Gotta be. Well, I'm getting off. Thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great night, and I'll be back Thursday at 6. Peace.